My wife packed her suitcase and walked out the door for a romantic getaway with her lover telling me she was sick of my face and ordering me to clear out my belongings before she returned. She threw the unsigned divorce papers onto the kitchen island and laughed as she climbed into a sports car that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. I did not scream. I did not beg. I simply finished my black coffee, made one phone call, and initiated a sequence of events that would leave her homeless before her tan even faded. I am Cornelius Jefferson. I am 68 years old, and if you are listening to this, you are about to witness exactly what happens when you mistake a quiet man for a weak one. Before I tell you how I dismantled my wife's entire life in 30 days, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The sound of plastic wheels grinding against vintage oak floors is a sound you never forget. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday. The sun was just beginning to cut through the large bay windows of the house I had designed with my own hands 30 years ago. I sat at the kitchen island, my hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching Beatrice wrestle with a zipper that refused to close. The suitcase was bright red, not a subtle red, but a screaming candy apple red that demanded attention, much like Beatrice herself. She was 60 years old, but she fought that number with every dollar I had ever earned. Her hair was freshly dyed a jet black that caught the light too harshly. Her nails were long, painted the same color as the suitcase. She looked frantic, eager, and cruel. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was hot, bitter, and grounding. "Neil, are you deaf?" she snapped, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I said, "Call a taxi for my bags." Desmond car doesn't have much trunk space because it is a real sports car. Not that ancient sedan you drive around like a hearse. I did not move. I placed the mug down on the marble countertop, a slab of stone I had personally selected from a quarry in Italy 2 decades ago. Beatrice did not know that. To her, it was just a surface to throw her keys on. "I am not calling a taxi." "Beatrice," I said. My voice was low. "I have spent 40 years in construction sites and boardrooms. I learned a long time ago that the loudest man in the room is usually the most frightened. I do not need to shout to be heard." She stopped struggling with the zipper and looked up at me. Her eyes were full of a contempt that had been brewing for years. It was not new, but today it was unmasked. "You are useless," she hissed. "You are just a useless old man, Neil. Look at you. You sit there in your bathrobe like a statue while I am trying to live my life. God, I am so sick of you. Sick of your silence. Sick of your old stories. Sick of the way you smell like old books and dust." She walked over to the island and slammed a thick manila envelope down in front of me. The papers slid across the marble and stopped just inches from my coffee mug. "Those are the divorce papers," she said. "My lawyer drafted them. I have not signed them yet because I want you to read them and weep while I am gone. I am taking everything, Neil. Half the pension, half the savings, and definitely this house. You are going to be left with that rusty sedan and your dog." She leaned in close, her perfume overpowering the smell of my coffee. It was a floral scent, heavy and expensive. I had paid for that bottle last Christmas. "I am going to Cabo," she whispered, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "For a month, with Desmond. He is taking me to a 5-star resort. When I get back, I want you gone. Pack your pathetic little boxes, take your drafting tools and your dusty blueprints and get out. Go to a nursing home, go to a shelter, I do not care. Just do not be here when I walk through that door." I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at her. "You are making a mistake, Beatrice," I said calmly. "The only mistake I made was not leaving you 10 years ago." She laughed, a sharp barking sound. "You are past your expiration date, Neil. You are a relic. The world belongs to people who know how to live, not people who save pennies and stare at walls." She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and yanked it. The wheels screeched again, leaving a faint scratch on the finish. I flinched internally, but kept my face like stone. That floor was Brazilian cherry wood. I had laid it myself when we were young, when my back was strong and my hands were rough from work. She never appreciated the foundation she stood on. She only cared about the view from the window. I watched her drag the bag toward the front door. She did not look back. She did not say goodbye. She just opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the morning light. I stood up and walked to the window. My movements were slow, not because of my age, but because of my discipline. I wanted to see him. Desmond was waiting in the driveway. He was leaning against a yellow convertible wearing a white linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest and sunglasses that cost more than my monthly utility bill. He looked like a man who sold timeshares or bad investment schemes, flashy, hollow. When he saw Beatrice, he flashed a grin that was all teeth. He did not come to help her with the bag. He just popped the trunk and watched as my wife, my partner of 35 years, struggled to lift the heavy suitcase into the small space. I watched through the glass. Desmond looked up at the house. He knew I was there. He took off his sunglasses and gave a little mock salute toward the window, a gesture of total disrespect. He was mocking the lion in its own den because he thought the lion had no teeth. He thought I was just a senile old man who had been conquered. He thought he had won the prize. Beatrice got into the passenger seat, laughing at something he said. She looked like a teenager going to prom, ignoring the reality of the gravity of her actions. The engine roared to life, a loud, aggressive sound that shattered the peace of the neighborhood. They backed out of the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel. I watched them go. I watched the yellow car turn the corner and disappear down the street. I stood there for a long time. The silence rushed back into the house, filling the space they had left. Most men would have broken things. Most men would have poured a drink. Most men would have fallen to their knees and wept for the betrayal. I am not most men. I am an architect. I understand structure. I understand load-bearing walls, and I understand that when a structure is rotten, you do not try to patch it. You demolish it. You clear the site, and you start over. Beatrice thought she was the one in control because she was the one leaving. She thought she held the power because she had the youth of her lover and the arrogance of her ignorance. She forgot one crucial detail. I designed this life. I built this house. I engineered the finances, and I knew where every single support beam was located. I turned away from the window and walked back to the kitchen. My coffee was cold now, but I drank it anyway. I needed the caffeine. I had a lot of work to do. I picked up my phone. It was an old model, reliable and secure. I dialed a number I had saved years ago for a day I hoped would never come. The phone rang twice. LaToya Graves, speaking a sharp professional voice, answered. LaToya was the best asset protection attorney in the state. She was a shark in a tailored suit, a woman who could smell blood in the water from 3 miles away. I had helped pay for her law school tuition years ago when her father, my old foreman, had passed away on a job site. She owed me nothing, but she gave me loyalty. "Good morning, LaToya," I said. My voice was steady. Uncle Neil, her tone softened immediately but remained alert. "Is everything all right? It is 7 in the morning. Beatrice just left," I said. "She is going to Cabo for a month with a man named Desmond. She left divorce papers on the counter. She told me to clear out my belongings and vacate the premises before she returns. She intends to sell the house and take half of everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that was heavy with calculation. "I see," LaToya said. Her voice shifted. The warmth was replaced by the cold precision of a weapon being loaded. "And what would you like to do, Neil? Do you want me to draft a response? Do you want to file for a restraining order?" "No," I said. I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the granite countertops, the custom cabinetry, the chef-grade appliances. I looked at the life I had built for a woman who despised me. "I want you to activate Clause 17, I said. LaToya took a sharp breath. "Clause 17. Neil, are you sure that is the nuclear option? Once we pull that lever, there is no going back. It triggers the immediate liquidation of the domestic assets and the transfer of the holding company. It effectively erases your footprint here." "I am sure," I replied. But Neil, LaToya pressed. "Clause 17 includes the primary residence, the house, your house. I know I said, if we do this..." LaToya continued, her voice speeding up, calculating the logistics. "We have to move fast. If she files those papers in court before we execute the transfer, the judge could freeze the assets. We need to be ahead of the filing." "She is in a convertible on her way to the airport," I said. "She will be in the air for 5 hours. Then she will be drinking margaritas and laughing at my expense. She is arrogant, LaToya. She thinks I am a helpless old man. She will not file anything until she gets back because she wants the satisfaction of kicking me out personally. We have time." "Okay," LaToya said. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. "I am pulling up the files now. We can have the shell company activate the purchase agreement by noon. The title transfer can be recorded electronically by end of business day today. But Neil, you have to be out. If we sell the house to the liquidation firm, part of the contract is immediate vacancy." "I understand," I said. And Neil Latoya hesitated. Clause 17 also involves the demolition order. The developers who hold the option on that land want to scrape the lot. They do not want the house. They want the dirt. If you sign this, you are signing the death warrant for that house. You built that house with your own hands. I looked at the ceiling where I had hand-painted the crown molding 20 years ago. I looked at the walls where we had marked Tyrell's height as he grew. I looked at the floor where Beatrice had stood 5 minutes ago and called me useless. It is just wood and stone, Latoya, I said. The home is already gone. It left a long time ago. Sell it. Sell it all, understood, Latoya said firmly. I will have the courier bring the final documents to you within the hour. Do not let anyone in. Do not answer the door unless it is me or my courier. And Neil, yes. I am sorry, she said softly. Do not be, I said. Just be efficient. I hung up the phone. I stood alone in the silent kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. It was the sound of a countdown. Beatrice wanted me to clear out. She wanted me to disappear. She wanted to come back to a house that was hers, ready to be sold to fund her new life with Desmond. She was going to get exactly what she asked for. I would be gone. The furniture would be gone, but she had made a critical calculation error. She forgot that before you can sell a house, you have to own it. And she forgot that in the state where we lived, thanks to a prenuptial agreement she had signed 35 years ago and never bothered to read since the house belonged to a limited liability company. And I was the sole manager of that company. I walked to the pantry and pulled out a box of heavy-duty trash bags. I did not need boxes. I was not keeping the memories. I was taking my clothes, my documents, and my dignity. Everything else was just debris. I had exactly 4 weeks until she returned. But I only needed 3 days to ensure that when she came back from paradise, she would be walking into a nightmare. The war had begun, and she did not even know she was on the battlefield. I had barely placed the phone back in its cradle when the heavy oak front door slammed open against the wall. The sound vibrated through the floorboards like a gunshot, shattering the fragile silence I had tried to cultivate in the wake of Beatrice leaving. I did not need to look to know who it was. The heavy, hurried footsteps were unmistakable. It was the sound of entitlement. It was the sound of scavengers arriving at a carcass before the heart had even stopped beating. Tyrell walked in first, but he was not leading. He was being pushed by the momentum of the woman behind him. My son looked disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled at the back and his eyes were darting around the foyer as if he expected the police to jump out from behind the coat rack. Behind him marched Madison. My daughter-in-law was a force of nature, but not the kind that brings rain to a drought. She was the kind that brings wind to a wildfire. She held a metal tape measure in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Her heels clicked against the Brazilian cherrywood floor with a sharp military cadence. They did not say hello. They did not ask how I was doing after my wife had just abandoned me. They did not even acknowledge that I was standing in the center of the kitchen holding a trash bag. To them, I was already a ghost haunting a property they believed was theirs. Madison walked past me without making eye contact. She stopped in the center of the living room and extended the tape measure. The metal strip snapped loudly as she hooked it onto the frame of the bay window. "This has to go," she announced, her voice echoing in the high ceiling space. "It is too dark in here, Tyrell. The feng shui is terrible. We need to knock down this retaining wall and open the space up. We need light. We need to modernize this ancient museum." I watched Tyrell. He stood by the entrance, wringing his hands. He looked at the floor. He looked at the ceiling. He looked everywhere except at his father. "Hi, Dad," he mumbled finally, his voice barely audible over the sound of Madison retracting the tape measure. I did not answer him. I just stared. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike. This was the man whose college tuition I had paid for in cash so he would never know the crushing weight of debt. And here he was, standing in my house while his wife planned to demolish the very walls that had sheltered him. Madison turned to me then. She looked at the trash bag in my hand and sneered. "Good," she said, sharp and cold. "You are packing. Beatrice said you would be difficult, but I see you are finally being practical." She walked over to the kitchen island and dropped her clipboard on the marble. It made a harsh clatter. "Listen, Neil," she said, using my first name with a deliberate lack of respect. "Tyrell and I have a contractor coming in 2 hours to give us an estimate on the remodel. We cannot have you shuffling around in the background looking like a lost puppy. It is bad for property value." She pointed a manicured finger toward the narrow door that led to the lower level. "You need to move your things downstairs," she ordered. "The basement is finished enough. There is a cot down there and a bathroom. You can stay there until we find a facility that will take you. We need the main floors clear for staging." I looked at Tyrell. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to say that this was his father. I waited for him to say that I was a human being and not a piece of broken furniture to be stored in the dark. Tyrell just coughed and adjusted his tie. "It is just for a few days, Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "Just until Mom gets back and we sort out the legal stuff. It is better this way. You will have your privacy. My privacy." He called banishment privacy. He was a coward, a weak man who would sell his own blood to buy a moment of peace from his wife. I tightened my grip on the trash bag. I could have thrown them out. I could have called the police right then. The deed was still in the company name. They were trespassers, but I remembered what LaToya had said. I needed them to feel secure. I needed them to believe they had won so that when the floor dropped out from under them, the fall would be fatal. "Fine," I said. My voice was raspy. "I will go downstairs." Madison did not even say thank you. She just turned back to Tyrell and started pointing at the crown molding I had hand-painted 20 years ago. "This all needs to be painted white," she said. "It looks like a coffin in here." I turned my back on them and walked to the basement door. I opened it and the smell of cool, dry air hit my face. I stepped onto the landing and closed the door behind me, shutting out the light and the sound of their greed. I descended the wooden stairs one by one. The basement was not a dungeon, but it was a place of exile. It was my archive. While Beatrice had filled the upstairs with flashy furniture and expensive decorations, I had filled the basement with the truth of who I was. I pulled the string on the overhead bulb. The yellow light flickered and then steadied, illuminating the rows of flat file cabinets that lined the concrete walls. They were covered in a thick layer of gray dust. Beatrice never came down here. Tyrell had not been down here since he was a child. They thought this was just storage for old junk. I walked over to the nearest cabinet and wiped the dust away with my sleeve. I opened the drawer. Inside lay the blueprints. There were hundreds of them, hand-drawn on vellum. The ink was still black and sharp. These were the designs for the city library, the community center, the high-rise downtown where the bank headquarters were located. They saw an old black man in a cardigan. They saw a retiree who drove a sedan. They did not see the architect. They did not know that every line on these papers represented $1 million contract. They did not know that the signature in the bottom corner of these drawings commanded respect from the most powerful men in the city. I ran my fingers over the paper. I had built this city. I had poured concrete and steel into the skyline. And now my own family wanted to bury me beneath it. I looked at the cot in the corner. It was an old military-style bed I kept for emergencies. There was a small desk and a chair. It was Spartan. It was humble. It was perfect. From down here I was the foundation. They were just the termites eating the wood above. They did not realize that the foundation determines whether the house stands or falls. I sat on the cot and listened. I could hear their footsteps above my head, the click of Madison heels, the heavy thud of Tyrell pacing. Then I heard a noise that made me freeze. It was a voice coming through the air vent near the ceiling. The ductwork in this house was metal and carried sound perfectly. I had designed it that way to ensure good airflow, but today it was my personal surveillance system. It was Tyrell's voice. He sounded panicked. He was not talking to Madison. He was on the phone. "I told you I would have it." He was whispering, his voice echoing slightly in the metal duct. "You have to give me 2 weeks. My mom is gone and the old man is basically senile. We are selling the house." I stood up and moved closer to the vent. "No, do not come here," Tyrell pleaded. "Please. If my wife finds out about the $200,000, she will leave me. This house is worth $2 million easy. Once we sell it, I will pay you everything, plus interest. Just do not hurt me. Please. I promise. The old man is out of the way. He is nothing. He is nobody." I heard the call end. I heard Tyrell let out a long, shaky breath. I stood in the dim light of the basement and a cold smile touched my lips. So that was it. It was not just greed. It was desperation. My son had borrowed money from sharks. He was in deep, $200,000 deep, and he had bet his life on selling my house to pay for it. He thought I was nobody. He thought I was out of the way. He had no idea that he was standing on a trapdoor, and I had just put my hand on the lever. The basement was cold, but the glow of the monitor kept me warm. I sat in the dark, watching the live feed from the camera I had installed inside the smoke detector in my study. It was 2 in the morning. The house above me was silent, but it was not asleep. I saw the door to my study creak open. A beam of light from a cell phone cut through the darkness. It was Tyrell. My son moved like a criminal in his own home. He was wearing his pajamas, but he was sweating. I could see the sheen of it on his forehead, even through the grainy black and white footage. He did not turn on the main light. He knew better. He crept toward the large mahogany desk, the one I had sat behind for decades, signing contracts that built the skyline of this city. But he did not stop at the desk. He went straight to the oil painting on the far wall. It was a portrait of the family from 20 years ago. Beatrice was smiling. Tyrell was a boy. I was standing behind them like a guardian. Tyrell gripped the frame with trembling hands and swung it aside. Behind the painting was the wall safe. It was a heavy steel reinforced box. He stared at the digital keypad. I leaned closer to my monitor. I wanted to see this. I wanted to see the desperation. He started punching in numbers. I knew exactly what he was typing. First, he tried his mother birthday. The light on the lock blinked red. Denied. He paused, wiping his hands on his pants. Then he tried his own birthday. Red light. Denied. He tried the anniversary of the day I founded my firm. Red light. Denied. He let out a frustrated hiss and kicked the wall. He looked around the room as if the combination might be written on the ceiling. He looked like a trapped animal. He tried one more code. It was the date of his wedding to Madison. I almost laughed out loud in the empty basement. He actually thought I would use the date of the biggest mistake of his life as the code to my fortune. The lock blinked red again. This time it let out a soft beep indicating a lockout period for too many wrong attempts. Tyrell slammed his fist against the steel door. He leaned his forehead against the cold metal, and I could see his shoulders shaking. He was terrified. The sharks he owed money to were swimming in his head, and the only lifeboat he could see was locked behind 3 inches of steel. He put the painting back crookedly and slunk out of the room. I sat back in my chair. He was looking for cash. He was looking for bearer bonds. He was looking for salvation. He did not know that he was looking in a graveyard. I waited until the sun came up. I waited until I heard the heavy silence of deep sleep settle over the house around 6 in the morning. Tyrell and Madison were late risers. They slept the sleep of the entitled. I moved quietly up the basement stairs. My joints ached from the damp cold of the lower level, but my mind was sharp. I walked into the study. The air still smelled faintly of Tyrell's nervous sweat. I walked to the painting and swung it open. I did not need a code. I used the biometric scanner that Tyrell did not even know existed because it was hidden in the rim of the dial. The safe clicked open. It was empty. It had been empty for a long time, but I had prepared a little surprise. I took a single piece of heavy cream-colored cardstock from my pocket. I placed it in the center of the middle shelf. Then I left the safe door slightly ajar, just a fraction of an inch. It was an invitation. I retreated back to the basement and waited. It took 3 hours. At 9:30, I heard Tyrell's footsteps again. This time they were hurried. He must have woken up thinking about another combination to try. He burst into the study. I watched on the monitor. He froze when he saw the painting was already moved. Then he saw the crack in the safe door. His face lit up with a hope that was painful to watch. He thought I had been careless. He thought the old man had forgotten to lock up his treasures. He rushed forward and yanked the door open. The smile died on his face instantly. He stared into the empty metal box. He frantically felt around the shelves as if the money might be invisible, as if millions of dollars could be hiding in the shadows. He found nothing. Then he saw the card. He picked it up. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. I knew what it said because I had written it in my best architectural handwriting. "The assets are not here, son." Tyrell screamed. It was a guttural sound of pure rage and panic. He crumpled the card and threw it on the floor. He kicked the desk. He grabbed the lamp and smashed it against the wall. "Where is it?" he yelled at the empty room. "Where is the money, you old miser?" He started pulling books off the shelves, tearing through the pages, looking for a checkbook, looking for a ledger, looking for anything. He was destroying the room. He was destroying his inheritance. I watched him unravel. He collapsed into my leather chair, breathing hard. He put his head in his hands. He realized then that the house was just a shell. The furniture was just decoration. The real value, the liquid power he needed to pay off his debts was gone. He was standing in a gold mine that had been stripped clean. He did not know when I had done it. He probably thought I had moved it yesterday. He probably thought I was reacting to Beatrice leaving. But he gave me too little credit. I am an architect. I do not build on shifting sand. I remembered the day the money moved. It was 5 years ago. It was a Tuesday, much like the day Beatrice left. I had come home early from a site inspection. I walked into the kitchen and found Beatrice on the phone. She did not hear me. She was laughing. It was a low, intimate laugh I had not heard in decades. She was talking to someone named Desmond. She was telling him about my life insurance policy. She was joking about how much easier things would be if my high blood pressure finally did its job. I did not confront her. I did not yell. I simply walked back out the door, got in my car, and drove to the bank. I spent the next week moving everything. I liquidated the stock portfolio. I cashed out the bonds. I transferred the balances from the joint savings. I set up a complex structure of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. I created a trust that was impenetrable. I left just enough in the local accounts to keep the lights on, and the facade maintaining the illusion of wealth without the substance. I left the operating account for the house with a balance that looked healthy, but was capped. For 5 years, I had lived with the knowledge that my wife was waiting for me to die. For 5 years, I had watched Tyrell grow more entitled and more distant, waiting for his turn at the trough. They thought the money was sitting in that safe or in the local branch down the street. They did not know that my wealth was digital encrypted and sitting on a server 4,000 miles away. I had secured my legacy by removing it from their reach long before they even thought to reach for it. Tyrell was still sitting in the chair, staring at the wall, when Madison walked in. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a cup of coffee. She looked annoyed by the noise. "What are you doing, Tyrell?" she asked, looking at the smashed lamp. "Why are you trashing the place? We have the contractor coming back today." Tyrell looked up at her. His eyes were red. "It is gone," he whispered. "What is gone?" Madison asked, taking a sip of her coffee. "The money," Tyrell said. "The reserves, the bonds. The safe is empty, Madison." He moved it. He must have moved it all. Madison frowned. She walked over to the safe and looked inside. She saw the crumpled note on the floor and picked it up. She read it, and her face went hard. "He is playing games," she said. "He is trying to scare us. He is just a senile old man, Tyrell. He probably hid it under his mattress in the basement. Go down there and tear that place apart." "I cannot," Tyrell said. "He is down there." "So what?" Madison snapped. "Throw him out. We were going to do it anyway." Before Tyrell could answer, Madison's phone chimed. She pulled it out of her robe pocket. It was a notification from her banking app. She frowned and tapped the screen. Her face went pale. "What is this?" she muttered. She tapped the screen again, harder this time. "Declined," she said. Her voice was rising in pitch. "Why was my card declined? I just tried to pay the deposit for the stager. It says the card is invalid." She looked at Tyrell. "Tyrell, did you forget to pay the bill?" "No," Tyrell said. "That is the card connected to the family trust. Dad pays that. It has a $50,000 limit." Madison dialed the number on the back of the card. She put it on speaker. "Thank you for calling Platinum Services," the automated voice said. "We are sorry, but this account has been closed by the primary account holder. If you believe this is an error, please contact the administrator." Madison dropped the phone. She looked at Tyrell. "He closed the account," she whispered. Tyrell stood up. The panic in his eyes was replaced by a dawning realization of the trap they were in. "He knows," Tyrell said. "He knows everything." Madison's eyes narrowed. She was not scared like Tyrell. She was angry. She was the kind of woman who got mean when she got cornered. "He cannot do this," she hissed. "That is marital assets. That is community property. He is stealing from Beatrice. He is stealing from us." She turned and marched out of the room. I heard her heels stomping down the hallway. She was heading for the basement door. I sat in my chair in the dark and waited. The first skirmish was over. The financial umbilical cord had been cut. Tyrell had no safety net for his sharks. Madison had no credit for her staging. They were about to come down here and demand answers. They were about to come down here and try to bully the old man. But they forgot one thing: the basement door locked from the inside. And I had the only key. The basement door rattled on its hinges as Madison pounded on it with the flat of her hand. It was 6 in the evening, and the heavy vibrations of her aggression shook dust from the exposed ceiling joists onto my cot. I sat up, slowly adjusting my glasses. I had spent the afternoon reviewing the structural integrity of my patients, and I knew I had just enough reserve left for one final performance. "Open up, Neil," she shouted through the wood. "We have guests coming in an hour. I need you upstairs, and I need you presentable." But do not dare put on a suit. You are not the host tonight. You are the help. I unlocked the door. Madison stood there holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres that looked expensive and tasted like cardboard. She was wearing a dress that cost more than the car Tyrell drove in college. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of perfection. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my comfortable gray cardigan and worn slacks. Perfect, she sneered. You look pathetic enough. Listen to me closely. The realtor coming tonight is Linda Sterling. She is the top closer in the state. She deals with high net worth clients, and she does not have time for senile ramblings. You are going to serve the wine. You are going to clear the plates. And if she asks who you are just the old caretaker we let stay here out of the goodness of our hearts. Do you understand? I looked at her. I looked at the fear hiding behind her mascara. She needed this sale. She needed the money to fix the hole I had blown in their finances earlier that morning. I understand, I said quietly. Good. Now take this tray and do not drop it. I followed her up the stairs. The house had been transformed. The personal touches I had loved were gone. The photos of my parents were gone. The African art I had collected over 40 years was gone, replaced by generic beige vases and abstract prints that meant nothing. It looked like a hotel lobby. It looked soulless. Tyrell was in the living room pacing. He was wearing his best suit, but he looked small inside it. He was sweating again. When he saw me holding the tray of appetizers, he looked away. Shame is a heavy coat to wear, son, especially when you tailored it yourself. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound. Madison clapped her hands. Places everyone, she hissed. Neil, stand by the sideboard. Do not speak unless spoken to. Linda Sterling swept into the room like a cold front. She was a tall woman with eyes that appraised the value of everything they touched, including people. She did not look at Tyrell. She looked at the crown molding. She looked at the hardwood floors. She looked at the square footage. Gorgeous bones, she said, her voice rasping like sandpaper on silk. A bit dated in the finishes, but the bones are solid. We can list this at $2.5 million if we stage it right. Madison beamed. She practically vibrated with greed. That is exactly what we were hoping for, Linda. We want a quick sale. Cash buyers only. I stood by the sideboard holding a bottle of 1996 Cabernet. It was a bottle I had been saving for my 70th birthday. Madison had pulled it from the cellar without knowing its value. To her, it was just red liquid to get the realtor drunk. Linda turned and finally noticed me. Her gaze was dismissive. She looked at my gray hair, my old cardigan, my silent posture. And does the staff come with the house? She asked with a dry laugh. Madison laughed too loud. Oh, that is just Neil. He is the old caretaker. He is a bit confused these days, poor thing. We let him stay in the basement. We will be moving him to a facility once the sale goes through. A facility. They talked about me as if I were a piece of dry rot to be excised. Dinner was served in the formal dining room. I moved around the table, pouring water, clearing salad plates, playing the role of the invisible servant. I listened as they dissected my life. They talked about tearing down the library I had built for Beatrice. They talked about ripping out the garden I had planted. They talked about the money they would make. Tyrell drank too much too fast. So Linda Tyrell said, his words slurring slightly. How fast can we close? We are motivated. Very motivated. Linda smiled, a predator looking at wounded prey. If the title is clean and you have the power of attorney handled, we can close in 30 days. I have a developer looking for a lot this size. He wants to scrape it, demolish it, erase it. My hand tightened on the neck of the wine bottle. I was standing right behind Linda. She was wearing a white silk blouse. It was pristine. It was expensive. It was the color of a blank page waiting for ink. Madison kicked me under the table as she saw me lingering. Wine, Neil, she snapped. Pour the wine. Do not just stand there spacing out. I moved forward. I leaned over Linda's shoulder. The bottle was heavy in my hand. I thought about the 40 years of sweat I had poured into this house. I thought about the disrespect. I thought about the lie that I was senile. If they wanted a clumsy old man, I would give them a clumsy old man. My hand trembled. It was a calculated tremor. I tipped the bottle. The dark red liquid cascaded out, not into the glass, but directly onto Linda's shoulder. It splashed onto her neck, soaking the white silk, turning it the color of a fresh wound. Linda screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek that shattered the atmosphere of the dinner party. She jumped up, knocking her chair over. "You idiot," she yelled, spinning around to face me. "Look what you did. This is Dolce & Gabbana." Madison, horrified, gasped and dropped her fork. "Neil," she screamed, "what is wrong with you? Get a towel. Tyrell, do something." Tyrell jumped up, grabbing napkins and dabbing uselessly at the realtor's shoulder. "I am so sorry," Madison stammered. "He is losing his motor skills. I told you, Tyrell. I told you he should not be serving." I stood there, the empty bottle in my hand, and I let my face go slack. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I played the part perfectly. I slipped, I mumbled. My hand. It just let go. "Get out!" Linda shouted at me, her professional veneer completely gone. "Just get out of my sight." Madison marched over to me and shoved me toward the kitchen door. "Go to the basement!" she hissed, her face contorted with rage. "Go downstairs and do not come out until I tell you. You have ruined everything." I stumbled backward, feigning confusion, allowing her to push me. I retreated into the kitchen. The sounds of chaos continued in the dining room. Linda was demanding club soda. Tyrell was apologizing profusely. Madison was on the verge of tears. Perfect. I moved quickly through the kitchen, but I did not go to the basement. I turned into the small pantry where I had hidden my iPad behind a stack of canned goods earlier that day. The chaos in the dining room gave me exactly the window I needed. They were too busy saving the deal to worry about the old man. I unlocked the screen. The document was already open. It was a purchase agreement prepared by LaToya. The buyer was listed as Delta Demolition and Salvage LLC. The price was significantly under market value. A cash offer. Immediate close. No inspections. But the most important clause was the occupancy clause. The seller agreed to vacate the premises immediately upon digital signature. The buyer was granted immediate right of possession for the purpose of asset liquidation and demolition preparation. I listened to the voices in the dining room. "I can pay for the dry cleaning," Tyrell was pleading. "Please, Linda, do not leave. We really need to sell this house." I looked down at the glowing screen. Tyrell was right. The house was going to be sold, just not by him. And not for him. I tapped the signature box. I used my finger to sign my name. Cornelius Jefferson. Manager. I hit submit. The screen buffered for a second. Then a green check mark appeared. Transaction complete. A moment later, an email notification popped up at the top of the screen. Subject: confirmation of sale. Body: Dear Mr. Jefferson, we have received the executed contract. Funds have been wired to your offshore holding account. Our crew is scheduled to secure the perimeter at 0800 hours tomorrow. Please ensure all personal items are removed. We look forward to clearing the site. I locked the iPad and tucked it under my arm. I grabbed a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge and took a long drink. It was crisp and cold. I walked back toward the basement door. I could still hear them arguing in the dining room. Madison was trying to convince Linda to stay for dessert. She was trying to salvage a deal for a house she no longer lived in. I opened the basement door and stepped into the darkness. I did not feel like a prisoner anymore. I felt like the warden. I sat on my cot and listened to the footsteps above. They were frantic. They were heavy. They were the footsteps of people running a race that had ended 5 minutes ago. I closed my eyes and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just pulled the pin on a grenade and was waiting for the inevitable boom. Tomorrow morning when the trucks arrived, they would understand. Tomorrow morning they would learn that you cannot sell what you do not own. And tomorrow morning, they would realize that the old caretaker had just evicted the landlords. The sun was barely up when my phone began to vibrate against the marble countertop. It was a video call request. The name on the screen flashed Beatrice. I stared at it for a moment. It was the morning after the dinner party disaster. The house was quiet upstairs, likely because Tyrell and Madison were exhausted from cleaning red wine out of the carpet until 3 in the morning. I accepted the call and propped the phone up against the sugar jar. Beatrice's face filled the screen. She was glowing. The Cabo sun had already bronzed her skin, and she was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses. Behind her, the ocean was a brilliant turquoise, a sharp contrast to the gray light filtering into my kitchen. She was holding a flute of champagne in one hand and waving the other in front of the camera. "Look at this, Neil," she said, her voice loud and distorted by the wind. "Look at what a real man buys for the woman he loves." On her ring finger sat a diamond. It was large, garish, and undoubtedly expensive. It caught the sunlight and fractured it into a dozen rainbows. "Desmond bought it for me this morning," she bragged, bringing the ring closer to the lens. "We are celebrating." He says it is a promise ring, a promise that my life is finally going to be exciting. Are you packing, Neil? I hope you are packing. I do not want to see a single pair of your old socks when I get back. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black and strong. I am packing, Beatrice, I said calmly. Everything is going exactly according to plan. She laughed, throwing her head back. She looked like a woman without a care in the world. She looked like a woman who believed the ground beneath her feet was solid rock when it was actually quicksand. Good, she said, taking a sip of her drink. Desmond and I are about to order lunch, lobster and caviar by the pool. We are going to put it on the room tab. This resort is incredible, Neil. They treat me like a queen, not like a nursemaid, which is what I was with you. She panned the camera around, showing off the infinity pool, the white cabanas, the waiters in white uniforms moving back and forth with silver trays. It looks expensive, I commented, my voice flat. It is expensive, she sneered, turning the camera back to her face. Very expensive. But do not worry, I am using the black card. You know, the one linked to the architectural firm account. I figured since I helped you build that business by tolerating your boring stories for 40 years, I deserved a severance package. She smirked, taking another sip of champagne. Besides, my lawyer says it is community debt until the divorce is final. So technically, you are buying me this lobster, Neil. Isn't that sweet? I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had sworn to love me in sickness and in health. I looked at the greed etched into the lines around her mouth. She thought she was so clever. She thought she had found a loophole. I opened my laptop, which was sitting next to my coffee cup. I logged into the corporate banking portal. The screen glowed blue in the dim kitchen. Are you sure that card still works? Beatrice, I asked. She frowned, adjusting her sunglasses. Of course it works, you old fool. I used it to book the flight. I used it for the room deposit. I used it for this ring. Desmond card was having some limit issues, so I just put it on mine. We are going to max it out, Neil. I am going to bleed you dry before I even sign the papers. I typed in my password. My fingers moved with the muscle memory of a man who has managed millions of dollars in assets. I navigated to the Authorized User tab. Beatrice's name was there, listed as an authorized spouse. Limit $50,000. Current balance $48,000. She had been busy. You might want to check again, I said, my finger hovering over the enter key. Banking systems can be temperamental, especially with international transactions. What are you talking about? She snapped. Stop trying to scare me. You cannot cancel this card, Neil. My lawyer said you cannot cut off my financial access during a separation. It is illegal. Your lawyer is referring to personal joint accounts, I said calmly. That card is issued to Jefferson Architecture and Design, LLC. It is a corporate instrument intended for business expenses. I tapped the key. Status active changed to status suspended. Reason, fraudulent activity. Beatrice rolled her eyes. You are so boring with your technicalities. I am going to order another bottle of Dom Perignon. Watch me. She turned away from the camera, waving at a waiter. Garçon, she shouted. Another bottle, and put it on the room. I watched on the small screen. The waiter approached with a handheld payment terminal. He looked polite but firm. Ma'am, he said, his voice audible through her phone microphone. I am sorry to interrupt, but the front desk just called. There seems to be a problem with the card on file. Beatrice laughed nervously. That is ridiculous. It is a black card. Try it again. We did try it, ma'am, the waiter said. It was declined. Code 05. Do not honor. The hotel requires an alternative form of payment immediately. The current bill for the room and amenities is $12,000. Beatrice's face went pale beneath her tan. She turned back to the phone, her eyes wide with sudden panic. Neil, what did you do? She hissed. I did what any responsible CEO would do when he detects theft, I replied. I reported the card stolen. I flagged the transactions as unauthorized. You cannot do that, she screamed. We are in Mexico. We have no cash. That sounds like a logistical problem, Beatrice, I said. Perhaps you should ask Desmond to pay. He bought you that ring, didn't he? Surely a man who can afford a diamond can afford a hotel bill. She spun around looking for Desmond. Desmond, she yelled. Desmond, give him your card. They blocked mine. I watched the screen intently. This was the moment. This was the stress test. Desmond stepped into the frame. He was not smiling anymore. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who had just realized his free ride had a flat tire. "Babe, my cards are maxed," he muttered. "You know that. I told you my liquidity is tied up in crypto right now. You said you had this handled." Beatrice looked at him, then back at the phone. Her face was contorted with fear and rage. "Neil, fix this!" she shrieked. "Fix it right now. They are going to kick us out. They are going to call the police." "I am afraid I cannot do that," I said. "Once a fraud alert is triggered, it takes 48 hours to clear, and since I am the one who triggered it, I have no intention of clearing it." 2 large security guards appeared behind the waiter. They did not look friendly. They looked like men who dealt with tourists trying to skip out on bills every day. "Ma'am," the waiter said, stepping back, "please come with us to the front desk. We need to settle this now." "No," Beatrice yelled. "Neil, do not do this. I am your wife." "You are the woman who told me to clear out," I reminded her. "You are the woman who left divorce papers on the counter. You are the woman who called me useless. Well, Beatrice, you are about to find out just how useful I was." One of the guards took her by the elbow. She tried to pull away, dropping the phone. The camera spun wildly, showing a blur of blue sky and expensive tile before landing face up on the pool deck. I could still hear them. "Get your hands off me," she was screaming. "Desmond, do something. Pay them." Then I heard Desmond's voice. It was clear and it was ugly. "Get off her," he said, but not to the guards. He was talking to Beatrice. "Stop clinging to me, you stupid woman. I told you I do not have the cash. You said the old man was a pushover. You said he would not notice." Desmond, Beatrice sobbed. "Help me. Help yourself," he spat. "This is your mess. I am out of here." I heard footsteps running away. Desmond was abandoning ship. The phone was picked up by one of the guards. I saw a close-up of a stern Mexican face. "Senor," he said, looking into the camera. "Who is this?" "I am the owner of the card that was stolen," I said in perfect Spanish, a language I had learned supervising crews in Texas 30 years ago. "That woman has no authorization to use my funds." "Do what you have to do." "Si, senor," the guard said. He ended the call. The screen went black. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen. My coffee was cold again. I closed my laptop. I imagined Beatrice being dragged through the lobby of that 5-star resort. I imagined the shame. I imagined the realization hitting her that she was thousands of miles from home with no money, no husband, and now no lover. She wanted to be independent. She wanted excitement. I had just given her the most exciting afternoon of her life. I stood up and walked to the sink to rinse my cup. The water ran clear and cold over my hands. Upstairs, I heard Tyrell alarm clock go off. The day was starting for them. But for Beatrice, the sun had just set. I dried my hands on a towel. Phase 2 was complete. The queen had been toppled from her throne. Now it was time to deal with the princes who were trying to steal the castle. The sound of desperation is distinct. It sounds like silk rubbing against the side of a stainless steel recycling bin at 2 a.m. I was standing in the shadows of the hallway watching Madison hunt. She was wearing a silk kimono that probably cost more than the monthly grocery budget for a family of 4. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf, but her posture was frantic. She was digging through my trash. Since the credit card had been declined and the safe found empty, Madison had become a woman possessed. She knew there was money. She could smell it. She just could not find it. She had torn apart the guest room. She had ransacked the library. Now she was reduced to sifting through coffee grounds and discarded mail looking for a crumb of the fortune she felt entitled to. I leaned against the doorframe and waited. I had planted the bait 3 hours ago. It was a single sheet of paper crumpled up and stained with a bit of orange juice to make it look discarded. It was tucked near the bottom of the bin right underneath yesterday's newspaper. Madison let out a small gasp. She had found it. She pulled the paper out and smoothed it against her hip. She squinted in the dim light of the under-cabinet LEDs. I saw her eyes go wide. I saw her mouth drop open. It was a transaction receipt, a wire transfer confirmation from the general operating account to an unnamed offshore entity. The amount was $500,000. The date was yesterday. She spun around, clutching the paper like a weapon. She did not see me at first. She ran to the kitchen island and slapped the paper down on the marble. She turned on the main lights, flooding the room with a harsh brightness that made us both blink. "Got you," she whispered to herself. "I got you, you old fox." I stepped out of the shadows. "Did you find what you were looking for, Madison?" I asked, my voice calm and low. She jumped spinning to face me. She did not look embarrassed. She looked triumphant. She looked like a cat that had finally cornered the mouse. She held up the receipt, her hand trembling with adrenaline. "Fraud." She spat the word out. Dissipation of marital assets, hiding funds during a separation. This is a felony, Neil. This is jail time. She marched over to me, waving the paper in my face. You moved $500,000 yesterday, she hissed. You are emptying the accounts before Beatrice gets back. You are stealing from your wife. You are stealing from Tyrell. I walked past her to the stove. I picked up the kettle and filled it with water. I set it on the burner and turned the dial. The click of the igniter was the only sound in the room for a moment. I am not stealing anything, Madison, I said, keeping my back to her. I am managing my business. That transfer was for an acquisition, international real estate, very volatile market. One has to move quickly. Do not lie to me, she screamed. You are hiding it. I know you are. Beatrice told me you were cheap, but she never said you were a criminal. Wait until the judge sees this. Wait until I show this to Tyrell. He will finally have the guts to have you committed, or arrested, maybe both. She slammed her hand on the counter. I want half, she demanded. I turned around slowly. The water in the kettle began to heat up a low rumble building inside the metal. Excuse me, I said. You heard me? She said, her eyes narrowing. You transfer $250,000 into Tyrell account by tomorrow morning, or I send a photo of this to Beatrice divorce lawyer. If you do that, she can freeze everything. She can freeze the accounts, the assets, the house. You will be locked out of your own fortune, Neil. She crossed her arms. It is a simple choice. Pay us our share now, and you can keep playing your shell games with the rest, or lose control of everything. I looked at her. I looked at the greed that distorted her pretty face. She was smart. I had to give her that. She knew exactly how the legal system worked. She knew that a judge would issue a temporary restraining order on the assets if there was proof of dissipation. She could tie my hands for months. She could stop the demolition. She could ruin the plan. But she made the same mistake everyone in this house made. She assumed she was the only one with secrets. She assumed she was the hunter. I took the kettle off the heat just as it began to whistle. I poured the water over a tea bag in my favorite mug, Earl Grey. The smell of bergamot filled the tense air. You make a compelling argument, Madison, I said, blowing on the steam. Blackmail is a very ugly word, but effective. However, before you call the lawyers, I think you should look at the other document on the counter. She frowned. What document, she asked. The manila envelope, I said, pointing to the far end of the island. It was sitting right there under the fruit bowl. You were so busy looking in the trash, you missed what was right in front of you. She walked over to it, slowly suspicious. She picked up the envelope. It was thick. It was heavy. It was not sealed. She opened the flap and pulled out the contents. They were photographs, high resolution, taken with a telephoto lens. The first photo showed Madison sitting at a booth in a dimly lit bar downtown. She was laughing. Her hand was resting on the arm of a man who was definitely not my son. The man was older. He was balding. He wore expensive suits that did not quite fit his paunch. I knew him well. Everyone in my industry knew him. It was Arthur Henderson, the senior partner at the firm where Tyrell worked, the man who signed Tyrell paychecks. I watched Madison's face as she shuffled through the photos. Photo 2, Madison and Henderson getting into his car. Photo 3, Madison and Henderson entering a boutique hotel on the west side. Photo 4, a time-stamped log of text messages, graphic, explicit, discussing not just their trysts but Tyrell, discussing how Henderson was keeping Tyrell employed only because of Madison, discussing how Tyrell was incompetent but useful as long as Madison kept Henderson happy. Madison's face drained of all color. She dropped the photos on the counter as if they were burning her fingers. She looked up at me, and for the first time since she moved into my house, I saw fear. Real naked fear. Where did you get these? She whispered. I have resources, Madison, I said, taking a sip of my tea. I have been in this city for 40 years. I know people who know people. And when my son's wife started wearing jewelry that my son could not afford, I got curious. I walked around the island and stood next to her. I picked up one of the photos. Tyrell is a fool, I said quietly. He is weak and he is greedy. But he has an ego. If he sees these photos, if he reads these texts about how his boss thinks he is a joke and how his wife is trading her body to keep him in a job he is unqualified for, he will break. I looked her in the eye. He will divorce you, Madison. And since you signed a prenup to protect his imaginary future wealth, you will get nothing. No house, no settlement. And Henderson. He will fire Tyrell to cover his tracks and dump you to save his own marriage. You will be on the street with nothing but your silk robes. Madison was shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The threat of the receipt was forgotten. The $500,000 did not matter anymore. Her survival was on the line. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I want silence," I said. I picked up the crumpled receipt she had pulled from the trash. I smoothed it out, and then I held it over the gas burner on the stove. The corner caught fire. We watched it curl into black ash. "I want you to stop digging," I continued. "I want you to stop looking for money. I want you to stop trying to undermine me. When Beatrice calls you, tell her everything is fine. When Tyrell panics about his debts, you tell him to trust his father." I dropped the burning paper into the sink and turned on the water. It hissed and vanished down the drain. "You are going to be my ally, Madison, not because you like me, but because I hold the detonator to your life." She looked at the sink, then back at me. She swallowed hard. "And the house?" she asked. "What are you doing with the house?" "I am selling it," I said. She nodded slowly. She understood. She did not know the full extent of the plan, but she knew enough. She knew that if she got in my way, I would destroy her. "Okay," she whispered. "I will keep my mouth shut." "Good," I said. I finished my tea. "Now go to bed, Madison. We have a big day tomorrow. Tyrell needs his rest, and you need to figure out how to keep smiling at a husband you despise." She gathered the photos with shaking hands and shoved them back into the envelope. She clutched it to her chest and practically ran out of the kitchen. I washed my mug and set it in the drying rack. The kitchen was quiet again. I had neutralized the threat from within. Madison was no longer a predator. She was a hostage. And Tyrell, my poor foolish son, was still sleeping upstairs, unaware that his wife was an adulteress and his father was the only reason he still had a job. I almost felt pity for him. Almost. But then I remembered the conversation in the basement. I remembered him bargaining with my life to pay his debts. I turned off the lights. The house was dark. The house was sold. And the only people who knew were me and the woman who was currently hiding evidence of her infidelity under her mattress. The playing field was leveled. Now it was time to clear the board. The rumble of a diesel engine shattered the morning calm at exactly 8 o'clock. It was not a polite sound. It was the grinding mechanical roar of a 26-foot moving truck backing up the driveway. The air brakes hissed like a warning shot. I stood in the foyer holding the leather leash of my old golden retriever, Jasper. Beside me sat a single duffel bag. It contained 2 suits, my shaving kit, and the hard drive that held the digital keys to my real life. Tyrell came bounding down the stairs. He was manic. He was wearing a tracksuit and expensive sneakers that were spotless. He looked like a man ready to coach a game he did not understand the rules of. He threw the front door open and waved the driver in. Finally, he shouted over the noise of the engine. He turned to me, his face flushed with adrenaline and impatience. "All right, Neil, let us go. The truck is here. We need to get your junk out of the basement before the stagers arrive at noon. I do not want the buyers seeing your dusty old drafting tables." He did not call me Dad. He had stopped doing that days ago. To him, I was just a squatter he was evicting. He marched past me toward the basement door. Madison stood in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, likely to hide the red-rimmed eyes from a sleepless night of terror. She hugged her arms around herself and watched me. She did not say a word. She knew that any interference would result in her life imploding. She was a silent spectator to her husband's cruelty. I heard the sound of wood scraping against concrete from downstairs, then the crashing sound of something breaking. Tyrell came back up the stairs carrying a stack of framed architectural renderings. These were the original hand-drawn concepts for the state courthouse. They were art. They were history. He walked straight to the large recycling bin by the garage door and dumped them inside. The glass on one of the frames shattered. "Trash," he muttered, wiping his hands on his pants. "Just old paper." He looked at me expecting a reaction. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to cry over my lost work. He wanted to see the old man break so he could feel strong. I simply stroked Jasper's head. "Be careful with the glass, Tyrell," I said calmly. "You might cut yourself." He scoffed. "I am fine, Neil. You just worry about getting into the truck. I hired these guys to take your stuff to the storage unit on the south side. I paid for the first month. After that, it is your problem. If you cannot pay, they will auction it off. Maybe you can buy back your memories with your pension check." He laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. He went back downstairs. I heard him dragging my old drafting chair. I heard him tossing boxes of vintage tools. He was not packing. He was purging. He was erasing me from the house I built. I watched as the movers, two burly men who looked bored, started hauling the few boxes Tyrell had allowed me to keep. They moved efficiently, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding. To them, it was just another Tuesday. Tyrell came up carrying a model of a bridge I had designed in 1995. It was delicate, made of balsa wood and wire. He held it by one of the suspension cables, dangling it carelessly. "Look at this toy," he sneered. "You spent hours on this nonsense. You were always playing with dolls, Neil, while Mom wanted a real life." He tossed the model onto the top of the pile in the truck. It crunched under its own weight. The bridge collapsed. "That is enough," I said. My voice was low, but it carried enough weight to make Madison flinch in the doorway. Tyrell turned to me, smiling. "What are you going to do, Neil?" "Stop me. It is my house now. I am the man of the house. You are just a tenant who missed rent." I looked at him. I looked at the greed and the weakness masking itself as strength. "You are right," I said. "It is all yours." I picked up my duffel bag. I adjusted my flat cap. I clicked my tongue at Jasper. "Come on, boy," I said. "Let us go." We walked out the front door. I did not look back at the foyer. I did not look back at the kitchen where I had cooked breakfast for 30 years. I walked down the stone steps I had laid with my own hands. Tyrell followed me out onto the driveway. He stood with his hands on his hips, surveying his kingdom. "Where are you going?" he asked, mocking me. "The bus stop is 3 blocks that way. Or did you call a charity ride?" I stopped by the curb. A black sedan turned the corner. It was not a taxi. It was a Lincoln Continental, blacked-out windows, sleek and silent. It pulled up to the curb and stopped right in front of me. The driver, a man named Marcus, who had been my security detail for 5 years, got out. He was 6 feet 4 inches of muscle in a tailored suit. Tyrell frowned. He looked confused. "Who is this?" he asked. "Is this Uber Black?" "You are wasting your money, Neil. You should be saving for the nursing home." Marcus opened the rear door for me. He did not look at Tyrell. He treated him like part of the scenery. "Good morning, Mr. Jefferson." Marcus said, his voice deep and respectful. "The plane is fueled and waiting at the private terminal. Ms. Graves is already on board." Tyrell laughed. It was a nervous laugh. "Plane? What plane?" "What is he talking about, Neil?" I handed my bag to Marcus, who placed it gently in the trunk. I helped Jasper into the back seat, where a plush blanket was already waiting for him. Then I turned to face my son one last time. The sun was behind me, casting a long shadow that stretched over Tyrell's shoes. He squinted, trying to see my face, but I was silhouetted. "You kept asking for space, Tyrell," I said. "You kept saying you needed room to grow. You kept saying this house was your future." I adjusted my cuffs. "I am giving you exactly what you wanted. The house is yours to deal with, the furniture is yours, the memories are yours." Tyrell sneered, trying to regain his composure. "Yeah, thanks for nothing, old man. Enjoy your ride. I hope it takes you far away." "It will," I said. I got into the car. The leather seat was cool and smelled of expensive polish. I settled back. For the first time in days, my shoulders dropped. The weight of the act was gone. The mask of the senile, helpless pensioner could finally be discarded. Marcus closed the door. The sound was a solid thud that sealed out the noise of the neighborhood. Through the tinted glass, I saw Tyrell standing there. He looked small. He looked confused. He was watching the car, trying to reconcile the image of his broke father with the luxury vehicle pulling away from the curb. Madison had stepped out onto the porch. She was hugging herself tighter. She knew. She knew that the man in the car was not the man Tyrell thought he was. She watched us drive away with the look of someone watching a lifeboat leave the Titanic. We drove in silence. The car glided over the asphalt. We left the suburbs. We hit the highway. The city skyline rose in the distance, a collection of glass and steel that I had helped shape. I took out my phone. I saw a notification. The transaction for the sale of the property had cleared escrow 3 minutes ago. The title had officially transferred to Delta Demolition. The countdown had begun. We arrived at the private airfield 40 minutes later. The Gulfstream G650 was waiting on the tarmac, its engines already whining with potential energy. It was a beautiful machine, sleek white, powerful. It was the chariot of a king, not a caretaker. LaToya was standing by the stairs. She was holding a tablet and wearing a smile that was sharp as a razor. "Welcome back, Mr. Jefferson," she said, shouting over the turbine whine. I stepped out of the car. The wind whipped my coat. I stood taller. My back straightened. The stoop I had faked for months vanished. I took a deep breath of jet fuel and freedom. "Is everything ready?" I asked. "Everything," she confirmed. "The demolition crew has their permits. They are scheduled to breach the perimeter at 800 hours tomorrow. The police have been notified that the property is vacant and under new ownership. Security will be on site to ensure no unauthorized entry." I nodded. "And the assets? The offshore transfer is complete. The domestic accounts are closed. Beatrice's credit cards are dead. Tyrell power of attorney is void because there is nothing for him to have power over. You are a ghost, Cornelius. A very rich ghost." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in a long time. "Good." I walked up the stairs to the plane. Jasper trotted happily beside me, ready for his first private flight. I settled into the leather captain chair. A flight attendant brought me a glass of aged scotch. No ice. I looked out the window as the plane began to taxi. I pulled out my phone one last time. I opened the messaging app. I typed in Tyrell number. I hesitated for a second. I thought about the bridge model he had crushed. I thought about the blueprints in the trash. I thought about the way he had looked at me with such disdain. I typed 2 words. "Good luck." I hit send. Back at the house, Tyrell's phone buzzed in his pocket. He was probably standing in the living room surveying the furniture he thought he had inherited, planning how to spend the money he thought he would get. He would look at the message. He would see "good luck" from his father. He would laugh. He would think it was a surrender. He would think it was the last gasp of a defeated man wishing him well in his victory. He would not understand that in my world, luck is for people who do not have a plan. And when I said "good luck," it was not a blessing. It was a warning, because he was going to need a lot more than luck when the bulldozers showed up in the morning. The plane accelerated down the runway. Gravity pressed me back into the seat. We lifted off, leaving the ground, leaving the city, leaving the betrayal behind. I sipped my scotch. The burning liquid tasted like justice. It took exactly 14 days for the Queen to return from exile, but she did not return with a crown. Beatrice arrived in the back of a yellow taxi that had seen better decades, let alone days. The suspension squeaked as it turned the corner onto our street, and the muffler dragged slightly on the asphalt, sending up a spray of sparks that matched the fury I knew was burning inside her. She did not look like the woman who had left in a convertible with a diamond ring and a younger lover. The Cabo sun had not been kind to her. Her tan was uneven, peeling in patches on her nose and forehead, giving her the look of a reptile shedding its skin. Her hair, which she usually kept dyed and sprayed into submission, was frizzy and pulled back into a severe knot. She wore a stained caftan and cheap sandals, likely the only things she had left after being evicted from the resort. She did not have the red suitcase anymore. She had a plastic shopping bag and a smaller carry-on that looked like it had been bought at a discount store in the airport. She sat in the back seat, arms crossed, staring at the meter, probably calculating how she was going to make me pay for it. Because that was Beatrice. Even after I had humiliated her, even after I'd cut off her funds, she still believed that the world revolved around her axis. She still believed that she could come home, scream at me for a few hours, and then settle back into the luxury I provided. She expected me to be there. She expected the house to be there. She expected to find me sitting at the kitchen island, cowed and apologetic, ready to hand over cash for the cab and beg for her forgiveness. She leaned forward and tapped on the plexiglass divider, barking an order at the driver. She was pointing at the driveway. She was probably telling him to pull right up to the front door so she wouldn't have to walk far. She was preparing her entrance. She was rehearsing the lines she would use to eviscerate me. She was going to tell me how cruel I was. She was going to threaten me with lawyers. She was going to demand reinstatement of the credit cards. But as the taxi slowed down, Beatrice stopped moving. She stopped talking. Her mouth, which had been open to berate the driver, hung slack. Her eyes went wide behind her sunglasses. She took the glasses off slowly, her hands trembling. She pressed her face against the dirty window of the taxi, leaving a smudge of grease on the glass. She was not looking at the house. She was looking at the empty space where the house used to be. The visual shock was absolute. It was violent. The manicured lawn she had prized so highly was gone, churned into a sea of brown mud and tire tracks. The oak trees I had planted 30 years ago had been stripped and removed, leaving only jagged stumps that looked like tomb markers. But the real horror, the thing that made Beatrice stop breathing, was the house itself, or rather, what was left of it. The roof was gone. The chimney where we had hung stockings for Tyrell was a pile of red bricks scattered across the yard. The front facade, the grand entrance with the double doors she had slammed 2 weeks ago, was missing entirely. In its place was a gaping wound of wood and insulation exposing the skeleton of the structure. A massive yellow excavator sat in the middle of the living room, its steel tracks buried deep in the debris of the Brazilian cherrywood floors. The machine was idling, its diesel engine rumbling with a low, mechanical growl that vibrated the air. It looked like a prehistoric beast, feasting on the carcass of my memories. Beatrice opened the taxi door and stumbled out. She did not wait for the car to stop completely. She nearly fell onto the asphalt, but she caught herself on the hood of the car. She stood there, swaying slightly as the dust from the construction site coated her skin. "No," she whispered. It was a sound of pure denial. "No. This is the wrong street. This is the wrong house." She looked at the mailbox. It was the only thing left standing, a simple black box on a wooden post with the house numbers painted in gold. 742. It was the right address. It was the right hell. The excavator operator, a man in a hard hat and a neon vest, pulled a lever. The hydraulic arm of the machine rose into the air. The metal claw opened like a hand reaching for the sky. Then it swung down. It smashed into the wall of the master bedroom. The sound was deafening. Wood splintered. Drywall exploded into white clouds of dust. Glass shattered and rained down like diamonds. The wall collapsed inward, revealing the interior of the room where Beatrice and I had slept for 3 decades. I could see the wallpaper. She had chosen a floral pattern that I had always hated. It hung in strips, flapping in the wind. I could see the outline of where the bed had been. Beatrice let out a sound that was not human. It was the keen of an animal watching its den being destroyed. She dropped her plastic bag. Her cheap clothes spilled out onto the street. She did not notice. She just stared at the machine as it took another bite out of the house. This time it grabbed the walk-in closet. Her closet. The place where she had stored her shoes, her furs, her ambitions. The claw crunched down and pulled. The floor of the second story gave way, and the closet collapsed into the living room below in a shower of debris. "That is my house," she screamed. Her voice cracked. She started running toward the driveway. She ran past the taxi driver who was yelling at her to pay the fare. She ran past the orange safety cones. She ran toward the chain-link fence that had been erected around the perimeter. A large sign was zip-tied to the fence. "Danger. Demolition in progress. Keep out. Property of Delta Demolition and Salvage." Beatrice did not read it. She threw herself at the fence. Her fingers gripped the wire mesh and she shook it, screaming at the operator. "Stop it!" she shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of insanity. "Stop it right now. You are destroying my home. Neil, where are you? Neil, stop them." She looked around wildly, expecting me to step out of the rubble and fix it. She expected me to wave a magic wand and rebuild the walls. She expected me to be the protector she had despised. But I was not there. I was 4,000 miles away, watching the live feed from a security camera mounted on a utility pole across the street. The excavator did not stop. It swung again, taking out the bay window she had loved so much. The glass exploded outward, sparkling in the sun before vanishing into the mud. Beatrice tried to climb the fence. She got one foot into the mesh and pulled herself up. She was hysterical. She was going to run into the path of a 20-ton machine to save a pile of wood that she did not even own anymore. "Hey, lady, get down from there!" a voice boomed. A security guard stepped out of the construction trailer parked near the sidewalk. He was a large man wearing a uniform that commanded authority. He walked toward her quickly, his hand resting on his belt. "You cannot be here, ma'am," he shouted over the noise of the demolition. "This is a restricted area. It is my house." Beatrice screamed, spitting saliva as she yelled. "That is my bedroom. Make him stop. Arrest him." The guard reached her and pulled her off the fence. She fought him. She scratched at his arms. She kicked his shins. She was a woman possessed by the demons of her own loss. "Let me go," she howled. "I am Beatrice Jefferson. I own this land. You do not own anything," lady, the guard said firmly, pinning her arms to her sides. "This property belongs to the developer. We have the permits right here. Now calm down, or I will have to put you in cuffs for trespassing." "Trespassing?" She laughed, a manic, broken sound. "Trespassing in my own home. My husband is going to sue you. My husband will destroy you." "Your husband is not here," the guard said, dragging her away from the fence. "And according to the paperwork, the previous owner vacated the premises 2 weeks ago. The building was sold for scrap." "Sold," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Sold. Yes, sold. Now get off the property line before I call the cops." He released her on the sidewalk. She stumbled and fell onto her knees. The gravel cut into her skin, but she did not seem to feel it. She just knelt there in the dirt, watching the excavator tear down the last standing wall of the kitchen, the place where she had left the divorce papers, the place where she had told me I was useless. The wall groaned and leaned. Then with a final crash, it fell. A cloud of dust rose up and engulfed her, coating her in the gray ash of her former life. Beatrice sat on the curb, coughing and weeping. She looked at the taxi driver who was standing over her with his arms crossed. "I have no money," she sobbed. "My husband canceled my cards." The driver looked at her with disgust. He looked at the ruined house. He looked at the security guard. He realized he was never getting paid. He spat on the ground, got back in his car and drove away, leaving her stranded. She was alone. She had no house. She had no husband. She had no lover. She had nothing but a bag of cheap clothes and the dust in her lungs. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it twice before she could dial. I watched on the screen as she pressed the contact for Tyrell. She held the phone to her ear, rocking back and forth. "Answer," she begged. "Tyrell, answer me. Mommy needs help. Please, baby, answer the phone." But the phone just rang and rang. Tyrell was not answering. Tyrell was currently sitting in a police station explaining to a fraud investigator why he had tried to use a canceled corporate card to pay a shark. Tyrell had his own problems. Beatrice lowered the phone. She looked at the screen. The call had gone to voicemail. She looked back at the pile of rubble. The excavator engine shut off. The silence that followed was heavy and final. She curled up on the sidewalk, hugging her knees to her chest. She looked small. She looked old. She looked like a woman who had finally realized that the foundation she had spent her life kicking had finally crumbled, and she was the one buried underneath it. I closed the laptop. The show was over. The house was gone. The queen was dethroned. I poured myself another glass of wine in my penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The view was different here. It was vertical. It was sharp. It was new. I took a sip. It tasted like closure. It tasted like the future. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to build something new. Something just for me. The fluorescent lights of the 4th Precinct police station hummed with a sound that was almost as annoying as my wife's voice. It was 2 in the afternoon and the air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. I sat on a hard plastic bench near the entrance, my hands resting calmly on the knees of my Italian wool trousers. Across the room, Beatrice was putting on a performance that deserved an Academy Award. She was leaning over the high desk, shouting at a tired-looking sergeant who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Her hair was still wild from her encounter with the demolition site, and her caftan was streaked with gray dust. She looked like a woman who had survived a natural disaster, but the only disaster here was her own personality. "Officer, you have to arrest him," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. "He is a maniac. He destroyed my home. He demolished a $2 million property just to spite me. That is arson. That is vandalism. That is domestic terrorism. I want him in handcuffs right now." Tyrell and Madison sat on a bench a few feet away. They looked shell-shocked. Tyrell was holding his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. Madison was frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to find a lawyer who would take a case on credit because her own accounts were frozen. They did not look like the arrogant conquerors who had invaded my home 2 weeks ago. They looked like refugees. The sergeant sighed and looked at me. "Mr. Jefferson," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue, "your wife is making some serious allegations. She claims you destroyed marital property without her consent. She claims you have left her homeless." I did not answer immediately. I looked at Beatrice. I looked at the woman who had packed a red suitcase and left me for a younger man. I looked at the greed that had turned her into a stranger. "I did not destroy anything, Sergeant," I said calmly. "I simply facilitated a business transaction." "Business transaction?" Beatrice yelled, spinning around. "You tore down our house, Neil. Our house. The house where we raised our son. The house that is half mine by law. You cannot just sell it and tear it down without my signature. It is illegal. You are going to jail, Neil. You are going to die in prison." She was so sure of herself. She had spent 30 years believing that simply being my wife gave her ownership of my soul and my assets. She had listened to her friends. She had listened to daytime talk shows. She had never once listened to me when I tried to explain how our estate was structured. The heavy double doors of the precinct swung open. The sound of confident heels clicking on the linoleum cut through Beatrice screaming. LaToya Graves walked in. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that made her look like justice personified. She carried a thick leather briefcase and wore an expression of absolute authority. She did not look at Beatrice. She walked straight to the desk and placed her card in front of the sergeant. LaToya Graves, attorney at law, she stated, "I represent Mr. Cornelius Jefferson and the Jefferson Holdings Group. I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the property at 742 Oak Street." Beatrice laughed. It was a hysterical, broken sound. "There is no misunderstanding," Beatrice spat. He knocked the house down. "It is gone. It is a pile of dirt. Tell her, Neil. Tell your lawyer what you did." LaToya turned slowly to face Beatrice. She looked at her with the same detached pity one might give to a roadkill. "Mrs. Jefferson," LaToya said coolly, "my client did not knock down your house. The house was demolished by its new owner, Delta Demolition and Salvage. They acquired the property yesterday morning." "My property," Beatrice screamed. "It was my property." LaToya opened her briefcase. She pulled out a binder indexed and color-coded. She opened it to a specific page and turned it so the sergeant could see. "Officer, if you look at the deed recorded in 1994, you will see that the property was never titled to Cornelius or Beatrice Jefferson. It was purchased by Jefferson Architecture and Design, LLC. She turned the page. "And here you will see the operating agreement for that LLC. It lists Cornelius Jefferson as the sole manager with full unilateral authority to buy, sell, or liquidate assets." Beatrice's face went purple. "That is a lie," she shouted. "We were married. Everything is 50-50. That is the law in this state." LaToya smiled. It was a shark smile. "Actually," Mrs. Jefferson LaToya corrected, her voice smooth as ice. "Do you remember 30 years ago when the company needed a bridge loan to expand? The bank required a personal guarantee from both spouses. You refused to sign. You told Neil that you did not want your name attached to his risky business debts. You said, and I quote, 'I want no part of your failures.'" I watched the memory hit Beatrice. I saw her eyes widen. She remembered. She had been so afraid of poverty then. She had refused to risk her credit score for my dream. "Because you refused to sign," LaToya continued, dropping the hammer. "Neil had to restructure the company. He had to separate the assets completely to secure the financing on his own. You signed a quitclaim deed, Beatrice. You relinquished all interest in the LLC and its assets in exchange for immunity from its debts. You chose safety over equity." LaToya pulled a yellow document from the binder. It had Beatrice's signature at the bottom. "You signed away the house 30 years ago," LaToya said. "It has never been your house. It was company housing, and the company just decided to liquidate an unproductive asset." The sergeant looked at the papers. He looked at the deed. He looked at the quitclaim. He looked at Beatrice. "This looks legal, ma'am," the sergeant said, sliding the binder back. "If the LLC owned the house and he is the manager, he can sell it. It is a civil matter at best, but there is no crime here." "No," Beatrice whispered. "No. That is not fair. I lived there. That was my life." "You lived there rent-free," LaToya reminded her. "A perk of being married to the CEO. A perk that has been revoked due to conduct detrimental to the company." Beatrice looked at me. For the first time, the anger was replaced by genuine terror. She realized she had not just lost the house. She had lost the leverage. She had nothing to trade. She had nothing to sue for. Tyrell stood up then. He walked over to the desk, his face pale and sweaty. "Wait a minute," Tyrell stammered. "If the house is gone, if everything inside is gone, what about the staging furniture?" I looked at my son. I remembered the conversation in the basement. I remembered him talking about paying back the loan sharks. "What furniture, Tyrell?" I asked innocently. "The furniture we rented," Tyrell said, his voice rising in panic. "Madison rented $40,000 worth of high-end furniture to stage the house for the sale. We signed a contract, Neil. We are responsible for it." I shrugged. "I told you to clear everything out," I said. "I sent you a text message. I told you the new owners were taking possession at 8 in the morning. I assumed you took your rented sofas with you." Madison let out a sound like a wounded animal. She grabbed Tyrell's arm, digging her nails into his suit jacket. "We left it there," she hissed. "We left it there because the truck was full of your stupid clothes, Tyrell. We thought we had time." We thought we could come back for it. You mean the furniture is under the rubble? Beatrice asked, her voice hollow. The excavator crushed the roof onto the living room, I said helpfully. I imagine the furniture is compromised. Oh my God, Madison wailed. We financed that furniture, Tyrell. It was on a high-interest short-term loan. If we do not return it in pristine condition, we owe the full replacement value plus penalties. That is $60,000. Tyrell looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at me with pleading eyes. Dad, you have to help us. You have millions. You have to pay for the furniture. They will kill me, Dad. If I have more debt, they will kill me. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I am not your dad right now, Tyrell, I said coldly. I am the manager of an LLC that just successfully offloaded a liability. Your debts are your own, your furniture is your own, and your choices are your own. I turned to the sergeant. Am I free to go, officer? The sergeant nodded. He looked at Beatrice and her brood with a mixture of pity and annoyance. You are free to go, Mr. Jefferson. Ma'am, you and your family need to leave the station. This is not a shelter. You cannot stay here. Beatrice looked around the room. She looked at the exit. She looked at the cold gray street outside. Where are we supposed to go? She asked, her voice trembling. We have no home. We have no money. You canceled the cards. That sounds like a logistical problem, I said, echoing the words I had spoken to her in Cabo. Perhaps you should ask Desmond for help. Or maybe Tyrell can get a refund on his tracksuit. I nodded to LaToya. She snapped her briefcase shut. We turned and walked toward the double doors. Beatrice lunged at me. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into the wool of my coat. You cannot leave me, she screamed. I am your wife. You promised to take care of me. I pulled my arm away. I did it gently but firmly. I brushed the spot where she had touched me as if wiping away dust. I did take care of you, Beatrice, I said. For 35 years. And you paid me back with contempt. The contract is expired. I walked out the door. The afternoon sun was bright. The air smelled of exhaust and city grit, but to me it smelled like victory. Behind me I heard the sergeant voice booming. All right, that is enough. Take it outside. All of you. Out. I got into the back of LaToya's car. I watched through the tinted window as my family was engaged out of the police station. Beatrice was crying. Madison was screaming at Tyrell. Tyrell was staring at the ground looking like a man who knew the sharks were circling. They stood on the curb, a huddled mass of failure and greed. They had no car because they had taken a taxi. They had no home because they had tried to sell it. They had no money because they had spent it all on illusions. They were homeless. And they were alone. Drive, I told LaToya. As the car pulled away, I did not look back. I had cleared the site. The demolition was a success. Now the only thing left to do was to enjoy the silence. The rain began to fall just as the sun set over the city. It was not a cleansing rain. It was a cold, gritty drizzle that mixed with the soot of the urban air and turned everything it touched into a shade of gray. Beatrice stood on the sidewalk outside the glass doors of the Meridian Heights apartment complex. She was shivering. Her caftan was soaked through, clinging to her body like a second skin. Her hair was plastered to her skull. She looked like a drowned rat seeking shelter from a storm she had created herself. She had walked the last 10 blocks. She had no money for a taxi and her feet were bleeding in her cheap sandals. But as she looked up at the towering glass structure, she felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. This was where Desmond lived. This was the sanctuary of the man who had bought her a diamond ring, the man who had promised her excitement, the man who had whispered in her ear that she deserved better than a boring architect. In her mind, she had already rewritten the narrative of what happened in Cabo. Desmond had not abandoned her. He had panicked. He had been confused. He was probably worried sick about her right now, pacing his living room, wondering how to rescue her. She convinced herself that once he saw her, once he saw how much she had suffered for their love, he would take her in. He would wrap her in a warm towel. He would pour her a drink. He would tell her that they could start over. She pressed the intercom button with a shaking finger. She waited. The red light on the camera stared at her unblinking. "Who is it?" A voice crackled through the speaker. It was him. It was Desmond. "It is me, Beatrice," she whispered, leaning close to the metal box. "It is Beatrice, baby. Please let me in. I am cold." Neil went crazy. He destroyed everything. I have nowhere else to go. There was a long silence. Beatrice held her breath. She gripped her plastic bag of clothes tight. This was it. This was the moment her knight in shining armor would lower the drawbridge. The buzzer sounded a harsh electric buzz that signaled the door was unlocking. Beatrice sobbed with relief. She pushed the door open and stumbled into the warm lobby. She ignored the doorman who looked at her with suspicion. She went straight to the elevators. She knew the code for the penthouse. Desmond had given it to her weeks ago when they were planning their life together. As the elevator rose, carrying her toward the 42nd floor, Beatrice tried to fix her appearance in the mirrored walls. She wiped the mud from her face. She tried to smooth her hair. She practiced her smile. She needed to look desirable. She needed to look like the prize he had won, not the burden he had discarded. She told herself that Neil was the villain. Neil was the monster who had left her destitute. Desmond was just a victim of circumstances like her. Together they would sue Neil. Together they would get the money back. Together they would win. The elevator chimed softly. The doors slid open. Beatrice stepped out into the private foyer of the penthouse. The door to the apartment was already open. Warm, golden light spilled out onto the hallway floor. She walked toward it, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Desmond," she called out softly, stepping across the threshold. "Baby, I am home." She walked into the living room. It was a sleek, modern space filled with leather furniture and abstract art. It smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. Desmond was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the rain. He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket and holding a tumbler of whiskey. He looked like the master of the universe. He turned slowly when she entered. He did not smile. He did not rush to hold her. He looked at her with a detached curiosity, as if she were a stain on his rug that he had not noticed before. "You look terrible," he said, taking a sip of his drink. Beatrice froze. This was not the greeting she had rehearsed. "Desmond," she stammered, "I went through hell. Neil demolished the house. He canceled the cards. I have nothing left. But I made it back to you. I knew you would help me." Desmond laughed. It was a low, dry sound. He walked over to the bar and poured himself another drink. He did not offer her one. "Help you," he repeated. "Why would I help you, Beatrice? You were a transaction, and the transaction has been declined." Beatrice shook her head, water dripping from her nose. "What are you talking about? We are in love. You bought me a ring." Desmond reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. He tossed it on the coffee table. It bounced and spun, coming to rest near her muddy feet. It was the same ring, or one that looked exactly like it. "Cubic zirconia," he said. $200 on Amazon. You really cannot tell the difference, can you? You were so desperate to believe you were worth a diamond you never bothered to check the clarity. Beatrice stared at the ring. The world was tilting on its axis. "But the trip," she whispered. "Cabo. You said we were celebrating our future." "I was celebrating my commission," Desmond corrected her. "Or at least the commission I thought I was getting." He turned toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. "Honey, come out here," he called. "The old lady is here." She actually came. Beatrice's eyes widened. "Honey." A woman walked into the room. She was tall, she was blonde. She was at least 20 years younger than Beatrice. She was wearing a white silk robe that Beatrice recognized instantly because she had tried to buy the exact same one with Neil money 3 months ago. The woman held a glass of white wine. She looked at Beatrice with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Beatrice," I presumed the woman said, her voice smooth and professional. "It is nice to finally put a face to the file." "Who are you?" Beatrice hissed, her jealousy flaring up even through her exhaustion. "Who is this Desmond? Is this why you left me in Mexico?" Desmond smiled. He walked over to the woman and put his arm around her waist. He kissed her temple. "Beatrice, meet Veronica," Desmond said. "Veronica is the senior acquisition manager for Delta Demolition and Salvage, the company that just bought your husband property." Beatrice's mouth fell open. She looked from Desmond to Veronica, then back to Desmond. The pieces of the puzzle were floating in front of her, but they did not fit. "I do not understand," she whispered. "It is simple, really," Veronica said, taking a sip of her wine. "We have been trying to acquire that lot on Oak Street for 2 years. The location is prime for a multi-unit luxury condo development. But your husband refused to sell. He was sentimental. He said it was his family home. So we got creative." Desmond interjected. "We did some research. We found out that the wife was bored, greedy, and easy to manipulate." Beatrice felt like she had been slapped. "You," she gasped, "you did not want me. You wanted the house. I wanted the influence, Desmond corrected. I figured if I seduced you, I could convince you to pressure the old man to sell. Or better yet, get you to divorce him and take the house in the settlement. Then you would sell it to Veronica at a discount and we would all be rich. Except Neil, of course. He took a step closer to her, his face hardening. But your husband is smarter than you, Beatrice. He figured it out. He knew who I was. He knew who Veronica was. And he made a counter move. Desmond picked up a folder from the table and threw it at her feet. He sold the property directly to Delta Demolition, Veronica said. Cash deal. Fast close. But he added a clause. A very specific clause. What clause? Beatrice asked, her voice barely audible. The vendor agrees to sell the property at 20% below market value, Veronica recited, on the condition that the acquisition team ceases all contact with the vendor's spouse and terminates any auxiliary relationships initiated for the purpose of leverage. Beatrice stared at them. He knew she whispered. Neil knew about us. He knew everything Desmond said. He called me the day you left for Cabo. He told me he was going to sell the house to Veronica Company, but only if I walked away from you the second the ink was dry. He offered me a finder fee. Beatrice, your husband paid me $50,000 to dump you. Desmond laughed again. He essentially paid me to take out the trash. And I took the deal. Because, let us be honest, Beatrice, you are high maintenance and low return. Beatrice fell to her knees. The realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. Neil had not just reacted. He had orchestrated. He had used her affair, her betrayal, as a bargaining chip. He had sold the house to the very people she was sleeping with, and he had used the proceeds to buy her heartbreak. He orchestrated the humiliation in Cabo, he orchestrated the demolition, and he orchestrated this moment right here. I watched it all unfold from my laptop in the penthouse. I had access to the security cameras in Desmond apartment because part of the sale agreement included a full security audit of the buyer assets, which I had performed remotely. I saw Beatrice on her knees in the mud and water pooling on Desmond's expensive rug. I saw the look of total devastation on her face. She had lost the house she did not own. She had lost the husband she did not respect. And now she had lost the lover who never loved her. She looked up at Desmond, tears streaking the grime on her face. But where am I supposed to go? She begged. I have no money. Neil locked me out. That sounds like a logistical problem, Desmond said, echoing my own words. He checked his watch. Veronica and I have a dinner reservation. You need to leave, Beatrice. You are getting mud on the floor and it is really killing the vibe. He walked over to the door and held it open. Out, he said. Beatrice stood up slowly. Her legs were shaking. She looked at the ring on the table. She looked at the woman in the silk robe. She looked at the man who had sold her for a commission. She walked to the door. She stopped for a second, looking at Desmond. I loved you, she whispered. I know, Desmond said coldly. That made it very easy. Goodbye, Beatrice. He slammed the door in her face. I switched camera feeds. I watched the hallway camera. Beatrice stood there for a long time, staring at the closed wood. Then she turned and walked toward the elevator. Her shoulders were slumped. Her spirit was broken. She rode the elevator down to the lobby. She walked out past the doorman who wrinkled his nose at the smell of wet dog and desperation coming off her. She stepped out into the night. The rain had turned into a downpour. The wind was howling through the canyons of the city. Beatrice stood on the sidewalk. She had her plastic bag. She had her cheap suitcase. And she had the absolute silence of a life that had been completely dismantled. She looked up at the sky and let out a scream. It was lost in the thunder. She sat down on a bench near the bus stop. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to keep warm. She was homeless. She was alone, and she had nowhere to go. I closed the laptop. The payoff was complete. I had used her own greed against her. I had used her lover against her. I had turned her allies into my weapons. She wanted a life of excitement. She wanted drama. She wanted to be the center of attention. Now she was the main character in a tragedy of her own making, and the curtain had just fallen on the second act. I poured a glass of water. I looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there in the dark and the rain, my wife was learning the hardest lesson of all. Be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. And be careful who you betray. Because the architect knows exactly where the trapdoors are. The cheap motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. It was a far cry from the marble floors and high ceilings of the house I had demolished, but it was exactly what my son and his wife could afford with the cash they had scraped together from pawning Madison designer handbags. I was listening to the audio feed from Tyrell's phone. I had not cut off his service yet. I wanted to hear the end of the story. I sat in my penthouse office looking out at the city lights while the drama unfolded through my speakers. It was 11 at night. The background noise was the hum of a window air conditioner unit that was fighting a losing battle against the humidity. "What are you doing?" Tyrell Madison's voice cut through the static, sharp and suspicious. I heard the fumble of a phone being hidden. "Nothing," Tyrell stammered. "I was just checking the balance." "Do not lie to me," Madison snapped. "I saw the screen. You were making a transfer. Who were you sending money to?" "We have less than $2,000 left, Tyrell. That has to last us until I can find a job or until you grow a spine." "I had to," Tyrell whispered. "It was Mom. She is at a shelter downtown. They kick everyone out at 7 in the morning. It is raining. She called me crying. I just sent her $300 for a motel room for 2 nights. She is my mother, Madison. I cannot let her sleep on the street." The sound of a slap echoed through the speaker. It was not the theatrical slap Juliet gave me at the wedding. It was the slap of a woman who had realized she was tied to a sinking anchor. "You idiot," Madison screamed. "You pathetic daddy-issue idiot. We are homeless, Tyrell. We are eating vending machine food, and you are sending money to the woman who started this whole mess. Your mother is the reason we are here. Her greed and her affair and her stupidity cost us everything." "She is not the only reason," Tyrell argued, his voice rising but still weak. "Dad did this. Dad is the one who went crazy. Dad is the one who ruined us." Madison laughed. It was a cold, dry sound that lacked any humor. "Your father is not crazy, Tyrell. He is the only sane person in this entire family. He won. Do you not get that? He beat us. And you are helping the loser." "Give me the phone," she demanded. "No," Tyrell said. I heard a scuffle. I heard the sound of a phone hitting the floor. Then silence for a moment, followed by heavy breathing. "You chose her," Madison hissed. "You always choose her. You chose your mommy over your wife. You chose her over our future. Well, I am done. I am done being the captain of this shipwreck." "Madison, stop," Tyrell pleaded. "We can fix this. I will talk to Dad again. I will beg him." "He hates you," Tyrell Madison said, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "He does not just dislike you. He despises you. And do you know why? Because you are weak. You are a parasite. And he knows it." She paused, letting the insult sink in. "And he knows about me," she added. What Tyrell asked, confused. "What about you? What about?" "He knows about Henderson." The name hung in the air. Arthur Henderson. Tyrell boss. The man Tyrell looked up to. The man Tyrell thought was mentoring him. "What about Henderson?" Tyrell asked, his voice trembling. "I am sleeping with him," Madison said. "I have been sleeping with him for 6 months. That is why you got the promotion, Tyrell. That is why you still have a job. You are incompetent. You cannot read a blueprint to save your life. Henderson kept you around because I made him happy in the afternoons." I could hear Tyrell breathing hitch. It was a sound of pure devastation. "No," he whispered. "That is a lie. It is the truth," Madison said relentlessly. "And your father knows. He showed me the pictures. He showed me the texts. He had a private investigator follow me." She laughed again, bitter and sharp. "He knew Tyrell. He sat at that dinner party, he watched you pouring wine, he watched you trying to impress everyone, and he knew the whole time that your wife was cheating on you with your boss. And he did not say a word. He did not warn you. He did not try to save you. He used it as leverage against me." Tyrell let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He knew, he choked out. "Dad knew. He watched you make a fool of yourself," Madison confirmed. "He let you walk around thinking you were a big shot while he held the evidence that your life was a sham. That is how much he respects you. That is how much he loves you. He watched you drown and he just took notes." I leaned back in my chair in the penthouse. It was harsh, yes, but it was the truth. I had watched. I had let him live the lie because the lie was the only thing holding him together, and now the truth was tearing him apart. "Why didn't he tell me?" Tyrell wept. "Why didn't he help me?" "Because you tried to sell his house," Madison screamed. "Because you tried to put him in a basement. Because you treated him like garbage. Why would he help you? You are his enemy, Tyrell, and frankly, you are not even a worthy enemy. You are just a disappointment." I heard the sound of a zipper. Madison was packing. "Where are you going?" Tyrell asked, his voice broken. "I am leaving," Madison said. "I am done with this. I am done with you. I am done with your mother. I am done with poverty." She zipped the bag shut. The sound was final. "I filed for divorce this morning," she said matter-of-factly. "The papers are in your email. I am not asking for anything because you have nothing to give. I just want out." "Wait," Tyrell said, panic rising in his voice again. "What about the debt? What about the $60,000 for the furniture? What about the loan sharks?" Madison scoffed. "The furniture rental agreement is in your name, Tyrell. You signed it. I was just the authorized user. The loan sharks are your problem. I never met them. That is your debt. Your mess." "But we are married," Tyrell pleaded. "It is community debt. Not if I can prove financial infidelity," Madison said. "And considering you just sent marital funds to your mother without my consent while we are insolvent, I think I have a pretty good case. Besides, good luck finding a lawyer. You cannot afford one." I heard the door of the motel room open. The sound of rain and traffic flooded into the room. "Goodbye," Tyrell, Madison said. "If Henderson will not take me back, I will find someone else. Someone with money. Someone who knows how to hold on to a house." The door slammed shut. Tyrell was alone. I could hear him crying. It was the ugly weeping of a man who has lost his dignity, his wife, and his illusions all in the span of 5 minutes. He was realizing that the father he had dismissed as a senile old man was actually the grand master of the board, and Tyrell was just a pawn that had been sacrificed. He sat there for a long time. I almost hung up, but then I heard the door open again. It was not Madison coming back. It was footsteps entering from the connecting room. Beatrice had been there the whole time. She had been in the next room listening. "Tyrell," she whispered. "Baby, are you okay?" I heard Tyrell shift on the bed. The springs creaked. "Get away from me," he said. His voice was low and dangerous. "Tyrell, please," Beatrice said. "She is a witch. You are better off without her. We have each other. We can figure this out. We have nothing." Tyrell shouted. "We have nothing because of you." "Me." Beatrice gasped, feigning innocence. "I did this for us. I wanted you to have the inheritance. You wanted a vacation," Tyrell screamed. "You wanted a boyfriend. You wanted a diamond ring. You left Dad. You walked out on him and you told him to clear out. You started the war, Mom, and you lost, and you dragged me down with you." He stood up. I could hear him pacing the small room like a caged animal. "Dad knew," Tyrell said, his voice shaking with rage. "Dad knew Madison was cheating on me. He knew everything. And he let it happen. He destroyed me to get to you. He is a monster." Beatrice agreed quickly, trying to align herself with his anger. "He is evil, Tyrell. We have to make him pay." "Shut up," Tyrell roared. "Just shut up. He is not the monster. We are. We tried to steal his house. We tried to put him in a home. We treated him like he was dead while he was still cooking our breakfast." He laughed a manic sound, and he played us Mom. He played us perfectly. He watched us dig our own graves, and then he handed us the shovels. "Tyrell," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "You are scaring me," good Tyrell said. "You should be scared. You are homeless. You have no money, and your son is broke and in debt to people who break legs for a living." He grabbed something. It sounded like the lamp. "Get out," he said. "What?" Beatrice asked. "Get out of my room," Tyrell ordered. "Go back to your own room. Go back to the shelter. I do not care. Just get away from me. I look at you and I see everything I lost. I see the greed. I see the stupidity. You made me this way. You taught me that money was the only thing that mattered." "Tyrell, baby, no," Beatrice sobbed. "Get out," he screamed. I heard the connecting door slam. I heard Beatrice wailing on the other side of the wall, muffled and pathetic. Tyrell was alone again. He was breathing hard. He was stripped bare. He had no wife. He had no mother he could respect. He had no father he could manipulate. He was facing the void. I reached for my phone and ended the audio feed. The silence in my penthouse was absolute. It was done. The family unit was disintegrated. The toxicity had consumed itself. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below was a grid of lights, a complex structure of energy and steel. I understood structures. I knew that if you remove the load-bearing walls, the roof collapses. I had removed myself. I was the load-bearing wall. And they had collapsed under their own weight. I felt a strange sense of peace. It was not happiness, exactly. It was the satisfaction of a balanced equation. The debt had been paid. The accounts were closed. Tyrell and Beatrice were now living in the reality they had created. A reality without me. I turned away from the window. Tomorrow I had a meeting with the architects for a new library project. I had work to do. I had a life to live, a life that was finally mine. 3 days after Madison walked out on Tyrell, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of debt and a mother he despised, my phone alerted me to a perimeter breach. I was in the library of my new penthouse on the 52nd floor of the Millennium Tower. It was a fortress of glass and steel, a building I had consulted on 10 years ago. The security was military grade. The doormen were former special forces. And the lobby was a cathedral of silence and marble designed to intimidate anyone who did not belong. And my family definitely did not belong. I watched the high-definition security feed on my wall monitor. Beatrice and Tyrell were standing outside the revolving glass doors. They looked like refugees from a war zone. Beatrice was wearing the same stained caftan she had arrived in from Cabo, but now it was wrinkled and hung loosely on her frame. She had lost weight. Her face was gaunt, her eyes darting around nervously. Tyrell was worse. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie hood pulled up to hide his face. He kept looking over his shoulder, checking the street for the black SUVs of the loan sharks he was convinced were tracking him. They were wet, they were dirty, and they were arguing with the doorman. Madison had given them the address. It was her final act of spite. She had sent Tyrell a text message with the location of my new residence, likely hoping that a confrontation would result in my son being arrested or at the very least humiliated. She knew I would not let them in. She knew I would not help them. She just wanted to watch the car crash. I pressed the intercom button connecting me to the front desk. Mr. Jefferson, the concierge, said, his voice calm and professional. "I have 2 individuals here claiming to be your wife and son. They are creating a disturbance. Shall I have security remove them?" I looked at the screen. I saw Beatrice pressing her face against the glass, trying to see inside. I saw Tyrell shaking the locked door. They had found the castle, but the drawbridge was up. "No," I said. "Let them into the lobby. Do not let them near the elevators. I will come down." "Very good, sir." I stood up and walked to the mirror. I was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, charcoal gray, with a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. I looked 10 years younger than the man who had shuffled around the kitchen in a cardigan. I looked like the man I was, the architect, the CEO, the man who owned the building, not the man who cleaned it. I took the private elevator down. The descent was smooth and silent. I felt no anxiety. I felt no fear. I only felt a cold curiosity. I wanted to see them one last time. I wanted to see what happened when the parasites realized the host was gone. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped out into the lobby. The space was vast, with 30-foot ceilings and floors of polished travertine that reflected the light like water. In the center of the room, beneath a crystal chandelier, stood Beatrice and Tyrell. They looked small. They looked out of place. They were dirt on a diamond. Beatrice saw me first. Her mouth dropped open. She took in the suit. She took in the shoes. She took in the way I walked head high, shoulders back. She had never seen me like this. She had only seen the husband she bullied. "Neil," she gasped. Her voice echoed in the cavernous space. Tyrell turned. He lowered his hood. His face was bruised. Someone had gotten to him. A warning, perhaps. "Dad," he whispered. I stopped 10 feet away from them. I did not smile. I did not offer a hand. I stood with my hands clasped behind my back, watching them. "You found me," I said. My voice was calm, carrying easily in the acoustics of the lobby. Beatrice took a step forward, reaching out with trembling hands. "Neil, look at this place," she said, her eyes wide with greed and shock. "It is a palace. You live here. You own this." "I own the penthouse," I corrected, "and I have equity in the building." She looked around, spinning slowly, trying to absorb the wealth she was standing in. "We could live here," she said, a manic smile stretching her lips. "There is room for all of us. I can see it, Neil. I can see myself greeting guests by that fountain. We can start over. I forgive you." I raised an eyebrow. "You forgive me?" "Yes," she said, rushing her words. "You proved your point. You showed us you are strong. I respect that. I do. A woman likes a strong man. Desmond was a boy. You are a man, Neil. A powerful man. I see that now. Let me come upstairs. I will be the perfect wife. I will cook. I will clean. I will do whatever you want. Just take me back." She tried to close the distance between us, but I held up a hand. She stopped. "And you, Tyrell," I asked, looking at my son, "what do you want? Do you want to live here too? Tyrell fell to his knees. It was not a gesture of respect. It was a collapse. He hit the marble hard. He clasped his hands together like a child praying. "Dad, they are going to kill me," he sobbed. "The sharks. They found me at the motel. They beat me up. They gave me 48 hours. I need $200,000. Please, Dad, look at this place. You have millions. Just write a check. Save my life. I will disappear. I will never bother you again. Just pay them." I looked at them. My wife bargaining with her affection. My son bargaining with his life. They were pathetic. They had learned nothing. They still believed that money was the solution to a problem of character. Beatrice was now crying, tears streaming through the grime on her face. "We are your family, Neil. You cannot leave us on the street. We have nothing. We are sleeping in a shelter when we can get in. It is cold. It is dangerous." "You wanted excitement, Beatrice," I said. "You wanted a life that was not boring. Surviving on the street is very exciting." "Neil, please," she begged. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was stupid. I was blind." "You were cruel," I corrected. "You were calculated. You planned to put me in a home. You planned to sell my house out from under me. You planned to erase me." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Beatrice's eyes lit up. Tyrell stopped crying. They thought I was reaching for a checkbook. They thought I was reaching for salvation. I pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was a check. Tyrell gasped. "Thank you." "Dad," he wept. "Thank you." I walked over to him. I did not hand it to him. I held it out so he could see it, but not touch it. "This is not for you, Tyrell," I said. He froze. "What?" I turned to Beatrice. "This is for you, Beatrice." She reached for it, her greedy fingers twitching. "Is it cash?" she asked. "Can I deposit it today?" I handed her the check. She unfolded it frantically. Her eyes scanned the numbers. It was for a substantial amount. $50,000. But then she read the payee line. It was not made out to Beatrice Jefferson. It was made out to the State Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. Beatrice looked up at me confused. "What is this?" she asked. "I cannot cash this." "No, you cannot," I said. "That is a prepayment for 1 year of care at the state psychiatric facility." She stared at me. "What?" "I remembered what you said," I told her, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the air conditioning. "You and Tyrell were so concerned about my mental health. You told everyone I was senile. You told the doctor I needed a guardian. You tried to forge medical documents to have me committed." I took a step back. "Well, I decided to take your advice. I looked into the process. And I realized that a woman who hallucinates that she owns a house she signed away 30 years ago, a woman who spends $50,000 on a credit card she does not pay, and a woman who believes her husband will take her back after she leaves him for a con artist must be mentally unstable." Beatrice turned pale. "You are saying I am crazy," she whispered. "I am saying you need help," I said, echoing the words she had used on me so many times. "And since I am a generous man, I paid for it. I spoke to the social worker at the shelter where you have been staying. They agree. They think you are delusional. They are waiting for you, Beatrice. A nice warm room with padded walls and no sharp objects." Tyrell stood up, his face red with anger. "You are a monster," he shouted. "You are mocking us. You are holding a check in front of our faces and laughing." "I am solving a problem, Tyrell," I said. "Your mother needs care. I have provided it. As for you..." I looked him up and down. "You are a young man. You have 2 hands. You have a degree I paid for. If you owe money, I suggest you get a job. There are plenty of construction sites looking for labor. It is hard work. It pays minimum wage, but it builds character." "You are letting them kill me," Tyrell screamed, lunging at me. 2 security guards stepped out from the shadows. They moved faster than Tyrell. One of them grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. Tyrell yelped in pain and was forced down onto the marble floor. Beatrice dropped the check. It fluttered to the ground, landing in a puddle of water that had dripped from her clothes. "Neil, do not do this," she wailed. "It is done," I said. I signaled to the guards. "Remove them," I ordered, "and if they return, call the police. The restraining order is already on file." The guards began to drag them toward the revolving doors. Beatrice was screaming my name. Tyrell was cursing me. Their voices echoed in the lobby, a cacophony of regret and rage. I watched them go. I watched as they were shoved out onto the wet sidewalk. I watched Beatrice fall to her knees trying to grab the door handle, but it was locked against her. I turned back to the elevator. The concierge was standing behind his desk, looking determinedly at his computer screen, pretending he had not just witnessed the dismantling of a family. I pressed the button. The doors slid open. I stepped inside the mirrored box. I looked at my reflection. I did not see a monster. I saw a man who had finally cleaned his house. The doors began to close. Through the narrowing gap, I saw Beatrice's face pressed against the exterior glass one last time. She was mouthing the word, "please." Then the doors shut with a solid metallic thud. The world outside was gone. The noise was gone. I was alone. The elevator rose swiftly, carrying me back to the sky. I adjusted my tie. I felt lighter. The burden of 40 years was gone. I walked into my penthouse. LaToya was sitting in the library reviewing contracts. She looked up as I entered. "Is it finished?" she asked. "It is finished," I said. She poured 2 glasses of wine, a vintage Bordeaux. She handed one to me. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. From this height, the people on the street were invisible. The cars were just lights in a stream. I thought about Beatrice in the rain. I thought about Tyrell and his sharks. I felt a phantom pain where my heart used to be, but it was fading, replaced by the cold clarity of survival. I clinked my glass against LaToya. "To new beginnings," I repeated. I took a sip. The wine was rich and complex. It tasted like freedom. I was Cornelius Jefferson. I was an architect, and I had just designed my masterpiece. Not a building, but a life. My life. And it was magnificent. 6 months have passed since the elevator doors closed on my screaming family in the lobby of the Millennium Tower. I have not seen them since that day, but I receive monthly reports from the private investigator I kept on retainer. I do not read these reports for pleasure. I read them to ensure that the perimeter of my new life remains secure. The updates are brief, clinical, and devastating. Beatrice was released from the state psychiatric facility 2 weeks ago. The doctors determined she was no longer a danger to herself, but she was certainly a danger to anyone looking for a pleasant dining experience. She now works in the back of a greasy spoon diner in the Bronx, washing dishes for minimum wage. The report says she wears rubber gloves to protect her hands, but the harsh detergent has already ruined her skin. She lives in a rented room above a laundromat, a space smaller than the walk-in closet she used to complain about. She spends her evenings telling anyone who will listen that she used to be the queen of a construction empire. Her co-workers call her the Duchess behind her back, mocking the way she tries to hold her head high while scraping half-eaten eggs into the trash. She has no car, she has no jewelry, she has no Desmond. She is exactly where she feared she would be. Invisible. Tyrell did not fare as well. His attempts to pay off the loan sharks led him to make one final desperate mistake. He tried to use my identity to open a new line of credit just days after our confrontation in the lobby. The fraud alert I had placed on my social security number triggered an immediate police response. He was arrested at the bank. Because of his prior record and the scale of the attempted theft, the judge was not lenient. He is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility upstate. The sharks cannot get to him in prison, which is perhaps the only mercy he received. He spends his days working in the prison laundry, pressing shirts for men who have actual jobs. He writes me letters every week asking for money for the commissary. I burn them unopened. Madison proved to be the most resilient of the parasites, but even she could not escape gravity. After the divorce was finalized, she was left with half of Tyrell debt, which was substantial. Her reputation in the city was ruined by the scandal with Henderson, who fired her publicly to save his own marriage. She moved back to her hometown in Ohio. The last report says she is working as a receptionist at a used car dealership, dating a man twice her age who drives a Corvette he does not own. She is trapped in the very cycle of mediocrity she tried so hard to marry her way out of. They are scattered, they are broken. They are living the consequences of their own character. I do not hate them anymore. Hate requires energy. I simply feel the cold indifference of a man who has finally taken out the trash. The hum of the Gulfstream engines is a white noise that helps me think. We are cruising at 45,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, heading toward Paris. I have always wanted to see the architecture of France, but I never went because Beatrice hated long flights and refused to go anywhere that did not have a beach and a butler. Now I go where I want. I sat in the cream leather seat looking out the window at the endless bed of clouds below. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in strokes of purple and gold. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. Latoya sat across from me. She was reviewing the blueprints for the new foundation headquarters we were building in Chicago. She looked up and caught me staring at the horizon. "You are quiet today, Neil," she said, putting down her tablet. "Are you thinking about them?" I turned my gaze from the window to her. Latoya was sharp, loyal, and brilliant. She was the child I should have had. She was the legacy I was choosing to build. "No," I said truthfully. "I am not thinking about them. I am thinking about structure." "Structure?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I spent 40 years building houses for other people," I explained. "I focused on the foundation, the beams, the roof. I thought that if I built a strong enough house, the people inside would be safe. I thought the structure could protect the family." I took a sip of mineral water. I was wrong. The structure does not make the family. The people make the structure. If the wood is rotten, it does not matter how strong the design is. The house will fall. Latoya nodded slowly. "You cleared the rot, Neil. It was painful, but it was necessary." "Do you think I was too hard on them?" I asked. It was a question I had asked myself only once in the darkness of the night. Latoya leaned forward, her expression serious. "Neil, they planned to put you in a home. They planned to declare you incompetent. They stole from you. They treated you like an ATM machine with a pulse. You did not ruin their lives. You just stopped paying for the illusions they created. You gave them reality. Reality is often hard, but it is fair." I smiled. She was right. "I do not feel guilty," I said. "I feel light. For years I carried them on my back. I carried their debts, their expectations, their greed. I walked around stooped over looking at the ground. Now I can stand up straight. I can look at the sky." "And what do you see?" Latoya asked, smiling back. "I see possibilities," I said. "I see a future that belongs to me. I see a life where respect is the currency, not money." I looked back out the window. They called me useless Latoya. Beatrice called me a relic. Tyrell called me a nothing. But look at us. We are flying at 600 miles an hour toward a city of lights. I am not useless. I am the engine. You are the pilot, Latoya corrected. And you finally took back the controls. "Yes," I said. "I suppose I did." The flight attendant approached with a bottle of wine. It was a 1982 Bordeaux, a vintage that was older than Tyrell and infinitely more mature. She poured a small amount into a crystal glass. The liquid was dark, rich, and heavy. "We will be landing in Paris in an hour," Mr. Jefferson, the attendant, said softly. "The car is arranged to take you to the Ritz." "Thank you," I said. I picked up the glass. I swirled the wine, watching the legs run down the side of the crystal. I looked at Latoya. "To family," I said, raising the glass. Latoya raised her water glass. "To family," she repeated. "The one we choose." I took a sip. The wine exploded on my palate notes of dark cherry leather and tobacco. It tasted of history and sophistication. It tasted of a life well lived. I looked down at the clouds one last time. Somewhere far below, in the grit and the noise, Beatrice was scrubbing a plate. Tyrell was folding a prison sheet. Madison was answering a phone. They were living the small, petty lives they had earned. But up here, the air was rare and clean. I was Cornelius Jefferson. I was a black man who had built an empire from nothing. I had survived poverty. I had survived racism. And I had survived the treachery of my own blood. I was not a victim. I was a victor. I turned my chair away from the window, facing the cabin, facing Latoya, facing the future. So I said, setting the glass down, "Tell me about the library design. I think the atrium needs more light." Latoya smiled and tapped her screen. "I knew you would say that. Look at this rendering." We began to work. We began to build. We began to create. I was 68 years old, and my life was just beginning. I looked at the reflection of my face in the darkened window of the jet. The tired eyes were gone. The slump was gone. The man looking back at me was strong. He was capable. He was free. And that was the only inheritance that truly mattered. My journey stands as a testament that unconditional love should never mean unconditional tolerance. For years, I mistook my silence for strength and my enabling for care only to realize I was financing my own erasure. True family isn't defined by bloodlines but by loyalty and mutual respect. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to stop being the victim and become the architect of your own freedom. Remember, you are never too old to demand dignity, and it is never too late to demolish a toxic life to build a masterpiece. If you enjoyed watching the tables turn, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, would you have given them a second chance, or did they get exactly what they deserved?